Well, if you were king for a day, or perhaps emperor, we can skip right past those lame monarchies, what sort of federal agencies would you get rid of? Well, I'm going to be going through quite a few of them today, and we're actually going to explain how much these federal agencies, like what their budgets look like, what they're supposed to do, all of those good things. And then we're gonna sit here before our panel of resident experts and determine which of these agencies should be reformed, which of them should be just abolished altogether, and which should be, I don't know, maybe federally prosecuted by the agencies that we keep after the fact. So we're going to go over all of that today. Plus, we are going to give you, for anybody out there that is thinking we're being mean with respect to getting rid of some of these federal agencies or some of these budgetary items, we're going to get into some of the details and some of the specifics of how exactly the federal government has been using your money at a time of high inflation and high prices. So all of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, powered by Good Ranchers.
We want to thank one of our Circle members for helping us have this idea today. Thank you so much to him. If you haven't already, go down to the link in the description and make sure you sign up for our community chat. We're about to cross 500 members. We'd love to have you join us there and get to know you.
All right. Well, as always, I'm your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a reasonably good person. With us back is my beautiful bride, Queen of the Bees, Tina.
Hello, everybody. Oh, and I do have to mention one thing today is, first of all, I am wearing some honeycomb earrings that Karen Hamilton got for me. So thank you, Karen. Yeah. And also, today is Nick's birthday.
I don't look a day over 50.
That's what they say, even though you're 44.
That's
Poor guy. He's always like, thanks a lot. But so Nick, tell them what I got you for your birthday.
Oh, so Tina actually got me.
I'm so proud of myself.
You know those like carnival popcorn machines, like the ones like on the two wheels. She got me. So I had been like, Gina, my chief of staff, I have told her like for years now. I'm like, you know what our office in Richmond really needs? She's like, what? I'm like, a popcorn machine. She's like, no, Nick, it does not need we do not need a. Yeah,
when I found this thing, so I was gonna get him like, just a cheap one off of like Amazon or something. But then I found on Facebook Marketplace, somebody had this one that was like a gold medal, like a real
heavy
nice one
for cheap.
And these things, the machine and the cart are sold separately, and all total is like $1,700. I got this thing for $200 on Facebook Marketplace.
Works, look, great condition.
I was so proud of myself, so frugal. And I kept, like when I told Nick, I got you your present today. And I kept like snickering to myself, so proud of myself because this man loves popcorn.
I do. I like popcorn.
Loves popcorn. And
it's actually pretty, like if you're not loading it down with butter, it's actually one of the more healthier snacks you can have.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. So
as long as you eat it plain.
Well, let's see what our resident historian and political prognosticator Christian Hines thinks about that.
No comment because I used to work at a movie theater. I loved popcorn until I got sick and tired of eating it every single day.
By the way, fun fact about Christian, and I think maybe if we have time on the episode day, we're going to force him to listen to it. Christian has never heard the song Richmond, North of Richmond.
No, I've intentionally avoided it.
I get that.
Because he's a curmudgeon.
Oh my gosh,
Everybody
such a curmudgeon.
No, I just don't like country music. I don't know what to say.
He didn't mean it. He didn't mean it.
I definitely meant it. I do not like country music.
You're gonna make an exception for this one.
You know what I like
awesome.
though? When you told me about this, all right, I'll just walk out.
No, go.
When you told me about this episode, my first initial thought was, which agencies to cut? All of them. Yeah. Anarcho-capitalism, baby. Like. There you go. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next Thursday. Have a great one. Thanks to Good Ranchers. That's it. That's a wrap. Like that was the initial, the initial response.
Good Ranchers is now the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, there you go. The Ron Swanson clip that, my ideal form of a government is one guy in a room with a button for who to nuke.
And then, of course, our producer of producers, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
I'm a big fan of popcorn, so I hope we get to try some of it soon.
Oh, of course. And I got good news for you, good Hamilton.
Yeah.
Central banking is probably gonna be in for some bad news today.
We love that.
As my imperial majestyness decides which federal agencies are going to leave and which ones are going to stay. All right, so whenever we do this, and obviously, look, we live in Virginia. There's a large amount of federal employees. And so there's some people that get upset with us when we talk about cutting certain agencies. And here's what I want to point out. The very first thing I want everyone to understand when we talk about either cutting federal agencies or cutting federal spending, some people seem to believe that if we cut these positions or if we cut this spending, all of a sudden the infrastructure, the people, the money, all of it just disappears overnight. That's not what happens. All right, that's not what happens. When you look at why a lot of these agencies exist, why a lot of these departments exist, and what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to achieve, and then you look at the amount of money they are spending and the amount of money that gets wasted on fraud, waste, and abuse, and then the amount of money that you could argue, okay, it's not fraud or abuse, but is it really necessary? Especially in a time when a lot of Americans are hurting. Because here, the dirty little secret, the federal government didn't have any of this money, except for maybe the stuff they printed, right? Which is funny money, right? No, what they did was they took it. They took it from people that earned it. So they took the money out of the communities for that the money originated from, have run it through a massive federal bureaucracy, and are now going to send some of it back. So the way to properly think about a lot of this is not, now we just lost all this funding for healthcare. We just lost all this funding for education. No, you didn't. You didn't lose it. Right? There's various mechanisms that can be used in order to make sure that money goes into the various institutions toward the various types of spending that you would like to see. The difference is who decides. And when the federal government takes the money, the federal government is the one deciding how it's spent. But when individuals keep the money, they get to decide. Or if you want to compromise, fine. Do you think the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, do you think we have a better handle on probably what Virginia needs than what the federal government needs? And wouldn't that probably be the same for every other state in the union? So these are some of the things that we just want people to think about. Get in the right mindset that just because the spending got taken out of the hands of the federal government doesn't mean the money disappeared. It means that you have to run it through a lot less bureaucracy before it can actually be spent on the things that you might want it to be spent on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, let's look at our beloved national debt. And so this is from a website called truthandaccounting.org, and they have two figures here. One is the U.S. published national debt, and that is sitting at about $32,730,889,887,122. And the bottom line is this is actually constantly moving. This is constantly moving. We just got it frozen right here. Now, you'll see underneath that, they say the truth. The truth is $159,577,956,546,000. All right. And they say that's each taxpayer's share is roughly $952,000. So
that's a big jump.
What is the difference? What is the difference? Let's go ahead and scroll down. So you're going to see right here, the U.S. published national debt consists of debt held by the public, intergovernmental holdings, including debt held by Social Security and Medicare trust funds. It does not include total unfunded Social Security and Medicare promises. So this is the important part to understand. You're a U.S. citizen. There are things that are promised to you that you're not currently getting, right? Your Social Security and other things. This amount is updated periodically to coincide with the debt to the penny, right? The truth, that's the number that they gave, that $159 trillion, is assets and liabilities reported in the financial report of the United States government, unfunded Social Security and Medicare promises based on assumptions. And this is based off of the number of people being born and whatnot. And what they do is they take this out over 75 years. So scroll down a little bit. And they have a whole thing. If you want to read the whole financial state of the union, you can, but it's what the federal government has. Assets, $4.96 trillion, and then what the federal government owes. Unfunded Medicare promises, $64.29 trillion. Unfunded Social Security promises, $47.7 trillion. Publicly held debt, $24.3 trillion. Pension and retire, healthcare liabilities, $12.8 trillion. Other liabilities, $1.8 trillion. That brings you up to a total of $151 trillion. So what they're basically letting everyone know is that a lot of these programs, especially Social Security and some of our healthcare programs, there are a lot of unfunded liabilities associated with those that cannot be funded based off of the way the programs currently operate, the current tax structure, and the current population projected growth. Right? It cannot, that's your liabilities. And then this gets you to a point where you can't fund anything else in the federal government except for your Social Security, your Medicare, and debt service payments. That's it. That's all you got based off of the amount of revenue that the federal government is taking in through either taxes or borrowing it. So that's what you might call a real problem. Now, there will some people that will tell you, oh, well, you can fix this easily, just raise taxes. Okay, but unfortunately, raising taxes has other consequences, because how do you get tax revenue in the first place? Well, you get tax revenue by people going out and engaging in productive labor. Well, if you keep taxing productive labor at ever and ever higher degrees, people tend to take their money and their assets at some point and they leave. They go to other places that don't tax it at the same rate. So taxing is not free in the sense that, oh, just raise the taxes. And of course, people will continue to work at the same rate of effort for less pay, because that's what you're doing. Like, if you think about it that way, when the federal government is coming in and saying, I want you to work the same amount of hours, I want you to be the same amount of productivity, but I want you to do it for less pay. I'm going to give you a pay cut. That's what a tax increase is. It's a pay cut for you. That means you have less money to spend on the things that are important to you, right? So that's what's actually going on here. So it's not just as simple as raising taxes and all this goes away.
Got a quick question here from Maud. Is it possible to do a big audit of the federal government, and how would you start?
Yeah, they've done these. In fact, the DOD has gone through, I think, I forget what Congressman was talking about. The DOD has gone through several audits. They fail them every year. They can't account for, I think it's hundreds of billions, or is it trillions now? I think at this point it might be trillions of dollars that the DOD can't account for over several years. They don't have $1 trillion budget every year. We're going to get to what their actual budget is. So yeah, you can audit them. And they do go through audits. The problem is that there doesn't seem to be a great deal of accountability. The other thing to keep in mind here is that when we break down what U.S. spending actually looks like, I think a lot of people think that the majority of U.S. spending is going to things like, maybe defense or education. Nope. The majority of U.S. spending is going to things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid programs. That's what it's going to. Those are called, that's mandatory spending, right? There's discretionary spending, which is the certain amount of money that the federal government is not already obligated to spend for certain things, right? And they have a great deal of discretion over that. That's why they call it that. And then they have the mandatory funds, which fall into things like Social Security. That's actually a much larger portion of the budget. So yeah, we can do the audit. We should do the audit. The question is what conclusions do we come to after the fact? And unfortunately, when we do these audits, our politicians never seem to come to the conclusion that what we need to do is either drastically cut some of these programs or drastically cut some of these agencies. And the way the statement goes, I can't remember who was it that said it, but it's politicians don't lose their seats for spending money. And so they continue to spend more. They bring home the bacon, so to speak. All right. Aldi says, I heard from the grapevine that Trump located $880 trillion that was hidden and Fort Knox was empty with no gold in it, but the Dems hit it once the election was over. Isn't it strange? I don't know, though. I mean,
that's more money than exists in the entire world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is why I'm skeptical of the grapevine.
Yeah. I would say, I don't think I don't think it was 880 trillion. And as far as gold, the problem is we've been off the gold standard since the 70s, since Richard Nixon. So how much gold is in Fort Knox just isn't as relevant as it used to be. Not to say it's not relevant, but it's, yeah. All right.
And thank you for the super chat.
Yes. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. So the first one is we want to talk a little bit about what does the debt actually look like? Let's go to the deficit. So clearly with this massive amount of debt and these unfunded liabilities, the federal government and our politicians in D.C., the rich men north of Richmond, are carefully looking at how we can be meticulous and how we budget so that we are not adding to this debt, which is going to cause huge problems nope, they're not doing any of that. In fact, due to a structural imbalance between revenues and spending, the federal government continues to run large and growing budget deficits. For 2023, the Congressional Budget Office estimated in May that the federal budget deficit will total $1.5 trillion, about $160 billion larger than in 2022.
That's just the deficit.
That's just the deficit. Again,
that's not money that's going to any of all that that's paying is. Well, honestly, all that that's paying is the Federal Reserve mostly because they hold most treasuries. But other than that, China, Japan.
Well, when we look at, again, just so everyone's clear, and I'm pretty sure everyone understands it, but just so we're clear, debt is the money you already owe. Deficit is the money that you're increasing your debt. You've gone over your budget for this year by $1.5 trillion, and so that will now be added to the debt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to clarify. I thought this was interest payments on the debt.
No.
Because that's also getting close to $1 trillion.
Yeah.
It's not there yet, but it's especially with interest rates what they are right now.
Yeah.
People forget this, that like for the longest time, the debt was very large, but interest payments were relatively stable because interest rates since the 80s had consistently been falling over time. I mean, not every year, right? But over time, since the 80s until 2021, interest rates have been on a downward incline.
Yeah.
And so what that meant is that you could grow the size of the debt, but the interest payments would stay the same. Now we have the opposite happening where interest rates are, at their highest level in like 15 plus years.
Yeah.
And thus, every time that the federal government has to issue new debt because they're not running a budget surplus, they're having to take on debt at a higher interest rate than the old debt that they're having to pay off with, whatever the bond is, a 10-year bond, 20-year bond. And so what that's going to lead to is an explosion of deficit spending, not just to pay for the government, just to pay for the interest on the debt that they already have, let alone the debt that they're accumulating in the future. So basically it's doom.
Well, yeah. So not only do we have massive debt, we still have massive deficits, and now we have massive deficits in a world with much higher interest rates. All right, let's go to the next one. This gives you kind of an idea. So to getting back to the point that Aldi was making and some other people were asking about as well, is the federal budget in the fiscal year 2022. So to give you an idea, when we look at the mandatory, see, this is what I think surprises a lot of people. Mandatory spending is $4.1 trillion. What does that constitute? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, income security programs, student loan programs, and then other is $520 billion. That's mandatory, which means when all the money comes into the federal government, the majority of it, you could argue the vast majority of it, is already allocated. That's already there because of all these various programs that have to be financed. Then there's the discretionary spending. That's $1.7 trillion. So out of the discretionary spending, $910 billion is non-defense, and then the rest of it's defense. And then they have the net interest on the debt, which is $475 billion a year. So $475 billion a year is already there just to pay interest on the federal debt, right? So when you look at the $6.3 trillion, that's the total outlays, $6.3 trillion, only $1.7 trillion of that is stuff that the federal government is really like playing with on a year over year basis. The other stuff is already spent. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit. And this is the total revenues. So individual income taxes represents $2.6 trillion. Payroll taxes represents $1.5 trillion. Corporate income taxes represent $425 billion, and other represent $356 billion for total revenues of $4.9 trillion. So this is how you get your major deficits, right? This is the government is bringing in $4.9 trillion, right? And then when it comes to what they're spending, we're at 6.9. Or excuse me, scroll up again? Make sure I get that right. 6.3, sorry. So that's, once again, pretty significant problem right now. Now, some of you may be thinking, but Nick, this spending is necessary. It's going to truly important things that we absolutely need.
Our audience knows better than that.
And I just want to thank Senator Rand Paul for his excellent work on this. Senator Rand Paul gave us the Festivus report. So go ahead and scroll up. We're going to look at the waste of 2022. And Senator Paul will tell you he couldn't get to all of it. But he's giving you, let's just say, an appetizer, like a quick peek into the buffet of federal waste. So let's take a look at 2022. Yep. What was the federal government spending your money on? Well, giving ineligible citizens COVID economic injury disaster grants. That was $4.5 billion.
For people who were not eligible.
Not eligible. Using COVID relief funds to construct an 11,000 square foot spa, $140 million. Using COVID relief funds to purchase luxury cars, $31,500,000. A Wisconsin school using COVID relief funds to upgrade turf fields, $1.6 million. What's another one? Oh, I like this one. Funding a 1.5-mile park in Austin, Texas, used for yoga and concerts, $9 million. Starbucks espresso machines, DOD, $192,592. Let me see. This one. You ready to be mad? You ready to be mad? All right. Maintaining 77,000 empty federal buildings. 1.7 billion. $1.7 billion maintaining 77,000 empty federal buildings. Basic education projects in Jordan, $210 million. Help. Oh, wait, this one's great. This one's great. You ready? You ready to be upset? You ready to be upset right here? All right. Helping illegal immigrants avoid deportation.
I love that one. I laughed out loud when you read that
Department of Homeland Security, $168 million.
So we have a portion, we have elements of the federal government that are using taxpayer money to help illegal immigrants avoid deportation from other elements of the federal government that use taxpayer money in order to deport illegal immigrants. How funny is that we have like elements of the federal government that are basically mutually contradictory in terms of their end goal?
Well, I'm sure it's funny to you, racist.
Let it be known that I'm certainly on the side of deportation more than I am of keeping illegal immigrants. But I think that's hilarious that we have, like we literally have federal agencies that are doing the exact opposite of what other agencies are doing.
Yeah, but it doesn't end there. Subsidizing the free New York Staten Island ferry, Department of Transportation, $70 million.
Why can't New York pay for its own fare?
Whoa, 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 whoa. How dare you? Of course,
You're not
people
supposed to say
in
ferries
Mississippi.
anymore, Christian.
Oh, my gosh. All right, Eastern, what is it? Let me see. East Baton Rouge unused federal housing grants, $13,400,000. Oh, here's a good one. This one, you know what? I think Rand Paul was a little bit harsh on this one. This one makes a lot of sense. Boosting the Tunisia travel sector during COVID-19. U.S. aid, $50 million.
They must have purchased a lot of Hunter Biden paintings.
$50 million to boost the Tunisia travel sector during COVID-19.
Why did they get 50 million and not the other 194 countries in the world?
Well, once again, you're a racist against Tunisians.
Oh, look, all that I'm saying is that all countries' travel sectors matter. Okay,
all right, wait. This one, again, I think Rand might have been off. Watching hamsters fight on steroids, National Institute of Health, $3 million. $3 million.
I don't know about you, but that actually needs to be a permanent budget item.
Loading hamsters up on
does sound
steroids.
entertaining.
Well, again, keep in mind, this is 2022, so like we've just come out of COVID.
Okay, but what about injecting 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine?
Wow.
$2.3 million.
Also, National Institute of Health, $2.3 million injecting 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine. Encouraging Ethiopians to wear socks, $2.1 million.
No, that says shoes.
Oh, shoes. Sorry, shoes. My bad.
That's way more important.
Way more important.
Way more important.
Now it makes sense. Now the expenditure makes sense. Training mice to binge drink alcohol, $1.1 million. This is all, by the way, National Institute of Health. For those of you who are wondering, what is the National Institute of Health? Whenever somebody said to you that wearing a cloth mask somewhere around was going to save you from the pandemic, and they said, trust the experts. That's who they were talking about, the National Institute of Health.
Our chat is just littered with people typing WTF over and over again.
Yes. All right, studying the romance between parrots. That was $689,000. Wow, they really cut the budget on that one. I really thought they could have done more. Using mice to study racial aggression. Using mice to study racial aggression. I'm a little bit curious on how this. And again, what did they spend on that? $519,000. So
what
half
about the
$1
one
million.
right above it though? Studying the social life and collective intelligence of ants.
Yeah.
Oh, I
NSF.
love this. This last one. Researching if Thanos could snap his fingers wearing the Infinity Gauntlet.
$118,000.
Researching if it would be physically
not a
possible
joke?
for Thanos to snap his The federal government
Wait a
spent
second.
118. That's like
They're basically
That's
finding out.
That's, by the
more
way,
than the average
do you know who
annual salary of
do you know who
somebody.
the NSF is? That's the National Science Foundation.
Trust the science, Nick.
Exactly. When anybody told you to trust the science, this is who they were talking about. And they spent $118,000 researching if Thanos could snap his fingers wearing the Infinity Gauntlet. But that's not all. They did some other stuff in here too. They studied the
verifying
romance.
that kids love their pets.
That was NIH, verifying that kids love. Now, had the study been verifying that kids love their pets when they're high on cocaine, That might have been.
After they've injected them with cocaine. Yeah.
I
and
actually
steroids.
think that the unused hotel rooms for illegal immigrants at 17 million was a pretty big one you skipped.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, I'm sorry.
There's so many of them here we can't.
Yeah.
And Rand Paul said he couldn't even get to all of it.
Yeah.
So is there a total here? Somebody was asking if there was a total.
Oh, let me see. Scroll down a little bit. Let's see if the total. Actually, it might be on the page up above. He also put the payment on the national debt, which is 470, I think, billion. Yeah, SBA made $4.5 billion worth of improper COVID-19 economic injury disaster loans. Holy crap! Scroll up to the top. Scroll up to the top. I want to see if there's a total somewhere up here. Oh, wait, stop. This year, I am highlighting a whopping $482,276,543,907 of waste, including the steroid-induced hamster fight club. Honestly, that's the only one I'd keep. I think that's the only one I'd keep. You know what? I would have merged this. I would have taken the cocaine away from the beagles because I've had beagles.
I can't believe these people and their cocaine puppies.
I think now if you would have given the cocaine and steroids to the hamsters and then done a fight club, that program probably could have paid for itself if you put it on Netflix.
So is this what we show everybody when people go, oh, but the government has to spend this money?
Yeah, it's like if the government didn't spend this money, who would pay to give hamsters cocaine and steroids, Nick? Who would do it? You? Would you do it? Are you going to go out and adopt all the cocaine-infused
We're
hamsters,
not allowed
Nick?
to because it's illegal.
If you're not going to adopt all the hamsters, then you don't care about this.
See, if a guy on the street in Detroit uses cocaine on himself, that's illegal.
Yeah.
But if the federal government does it, it's suddenly
Well, if you're
research that warrants, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
If you're
to be
wearing a
spent
lab
on
coat,
it.
it all changes, all right?
Somebody asked Christian if they are still studying shrimp and lobsters on treadmills.
Yeah, and I told Bandit that was a previous year. There's actually a question that I think
that was a previous year.
Well,
Wait, there was one. What was that one where they fed cocaine to the pigeons or something?
Yeah, that was
Years
also
back?
a previous year.
Yeah, that was a previous year, too. It was determining whether or not, cocaine.
It was determining the effects of cocaine on pigeons.
Yeah, but it was something different, too. It
Oh,
was almost like the sexual
the
habits.
mating habits
It was the
of-
mating habits of pigeons on cocaine. And I'm like, you know what? I can do this study for half the cost. I'm just going to tell you, I'm thinking it probably affects it.
So there's actually a really good question from Lego Spartan that I want to ask you. Yeah. I told him in the chat my views on it, but I wanted your take on it since we've gone through some of the ridiculous spending and we're about to jump into, all right, let's talk about some of these agencies and whether or not they need to be eliminated. He asked a question of the concept of debt forgiveness. And the question that he's got is, this will never happen, but if all the nation had debt forgiveness and we all started from ground zero, would the U.S. keep spending the way they do now, or would they restructure? And I told him in the chat that from my point of view, there is no concept as debt forgiveness doesn't exist.
No.
Because somebody still pays.
Yeah.
Because what debt is you've taken out money. For every dollar of debt, there had to be somebody to lend that dollar.
Yes.
And so when you forgive the debt, you're defaulting on the debt and you're telling the lender, I'm not paying you, which means, in effect, the lender pays the money now because they gave you money that they're never going to get back, which effectively means that they're paying it. So when you say debt forgiveness, what you're basically saying is we're shifting the burden of who's going to have to pay it back to the person who lent it in the first place.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot when they were talking about student loan debt forgiveness, and we were like, okay, the federal government didn't spend its own money; it spent somebody else's money, and you cannot forgive. Like theoretically, if I give you a loan and I forgive it, that doesn't mean that the consequences of forgiving that loan went away. Like I'm still out the money because theoretically I gave you the money and you were going to go do something with it and then pay it back, usually at an interest rate. And then I'm projecting what I'm going to do in the future based off of receiving that money with interest. So if I now forgive it, then okay, yeah, you're off the hook. But now I have less money to spend on whatever else it is. Now, this is especially egregious when it's the federal government because they're not spending their money. Liz isn't spending her own money, right? So that's the problem with it. So whenever we talk about debt forgiveness, the important thing to understand is all you're doing is you're transferring the responsibility for pain. That's what it is. You're not forgiving in the sense that it just goes away. You're transferring the responsibility for who has to pay for it.
There's another fantastic question in the super chat from Nico Barney.
Yeah.
Nico says, the real question is, when does all of the spending break the camel's back? We've done like whole podcasts about this. And why does anyone want to share a government with people who haven't been able to balance a checkbook in over 60 years? Fantastic question. And thank you for the super chat, by the way. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
So when it breaks the camel's back, I think is, we've talked about this before with things like a sovereign debt crisis. We've talked about it when the federal, basically our mandatory obligations, our Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, we get to a point where if you raise taxes, you have such a negative impact on economic development and economic growth that you're not actually collecting more in revenue. You may have raised the taxes, but you're not collecting more in revenue. There's this, I don't know why this is so hard for some people on the progressive left to understand. There is a point where if you tax, past a certain rate, either through people leaving the country or people, committing fraud or whatever else, they don't pay the taxes, or what they do is they drastically decrease their economic output because it's no longer viable to do it. Like, why would I work, so much harder if the percentage that I'm gonna have to pay in taxes is so much that it's no longer worth my time to do it? And then what you actually have is you have higher tax rates and decreased revenue. So there is a sweet spot. And Arthur Laffer talks about this. I actually had a couple days that myself and about probably 30 other state legislators, we got a chance to just sit with Art Laffer for 2 days and really go over tax policies and understand this concept. So you're going to get to a point where you can't just tax your way out of the problems that we're currently in. You're not going to grow your way out of the problems because the debt has become so significant and the interest on the debt, along with all of your mandatory programs. So what's the last thing left, especially when people no longer want to loan the federal government money? Well, they've got to print. Well, when you print and you have an inflationary crisis or you get to hyperinflation, that's the part where I think the camel's back has been broken, because now in order for the federal government to, quote, balance their books, they essentially have to screw over everyone in the economy by inflating the currency. And as we discussed, I think it was last episode, inflation affects people very, very differently. If you're at one end of the economic spectrum and you actually have the ability to move assets, then inflationary monetary policy doesn't hurt you quite as much, at least in the immediate return. Plus, if you've positioned yourself in a way to where you're the first people to get the money, you're actually getting the full value of that dollar when you first go up to go buy assets. It's everybody downstream that's then impacted by rising prices who are living on a fixed income. They're the ones that are they're just done. Like this, that's the part where you actually get people revolting and pushing back. And then the question just becomes, who are they revolting against and why? Like, have we properly diagnosed the problem so that the people who are justifiably angry direct that anger at the right people? I'm not suggesting violence. I'm just saying that they properly understand, these are the people that screwed you over. And that remains to be seen, because what we've seen in a lot of countries is that's not the case. You always get some, figure that's able to, point all of their anger in a particular direction that isn't necessarily useful for solving the problem. But I think it's going to come through hyperinflation. I think it's going to come through a point where the federal government can just no longer pay its bills, can't tax anymore, can't borrow as much as it needs. And so it's going to start printing at excessive rates. And we got a small peek of what that looks like during COVID. I think we're going to see it for other things here in the future. Just to give you an idea too, like when he likes to say, like, Rand Paul scratched the surface of what he thought was wasteful spending, and it came out to $482 billion. Like that's roughly the state budget of all of South Dakota, right? It's more of the state budget than Delaware. Like that's a massive amount of money. And like he said, he was just scratching the surface. I think he came up with like 20 line items, right? He could have gone on. So with all of that out there, so now, like, hopefully we've made a case that the federal government has not done a good job spending your money. It's not done a good job managing its budget. It's not done a good job managing deficits. It's done a horrible job with all of it.
When you said that's more than the state budget of South Dakota, no, that's more than the state budget of California.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, $482 billion. Yeah, you're right.
$482 billion is like that's like,
the state budget of California is $286 billion. I had one of my decimals.
Yeah, that's a huge, because I was like, in Virginia, our budget's like $100-ish billion, and I remember. Like, I remember when Terry McAuliffe was like, this is our first $100 billion budget. Congratulations, everybody. Like that's something to brag about.
That's to brag about.
So to give you an idea, this is almost, or what is it, right around twice the size of, not quite twice the size of the largest budget in America, state budget in America, which is California, which is also, I believe, the 5th largest economy in the world. So just this waste represents roughly
almost twice as much.
Yeah.
Or I mean, 286 billion. So it's not really almost twice as much, but like, 200 billion more than the state budget of California, which last I checked is not the most fiscally responsible state in the union. There's probably a lot that you could cut from the California budget as well.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that kind of leads us to the heart of today's podcast, right?
And I want to get to this, too, because Nico Barney, again, thank you for the super chat, said GDP was at its highest during World War II, and now as we move towards World War III, the dam has break. I feel it's going to come sooner than later. So, Nico, here's the other thing that I think is interesting when we talk about GDP numbers. We actually did a Y-minute on this, on why GDP numbers actually
I think they mean debt to GDP. Because that was at its highest level during World War II.
Okay.
And we're approaching that level again.
Yeah, debt to GDP, absolutely. The other thing, too, to remember about GDP, because politicians love to throw out GDP numbers, GDP actually includes government spending. So when the government prints a bunch of money and then spends it, that actually counts positively toward their GDP numbers. But obviously we know that that's not an accurate reflection on whether or not the economic health of your country is sound. So it's one of the ways that, GDP numbers can be somewhat manipulative.
They kind of cook their books this way.
Yeah, they can kind of cook the books with it. But after going to all that, now let's go into our list of federal agencies, and let's get cutting, baby. All right.
This would be a lot simpler if we just simply said what to keep.
We are not going to go over. We wanted to show you this page.
Can you scroll up to the top, Hamilton?
We wanted to show you this page, not because we're going to go through each one of these, but because we wanted you to get a feel for how expansive and massive this is. Because it's not good enough to just say, Department of Agriculture. Department of Agriculture has all kinds of bureaus and other things. And you're going to see that's true of like all of these things. So go ahead and scroll down. And that's...
Hang on, I want to read off the top of this article because it's quite frankly, it's hilarious. The nerds at Wikipedia, and I say this as a fellow nerd, former Wikipedian myself, has an article titled List of Federal Agencies in the United States. It's a long article.
Yeah.
But it starts with a hilarious admission. I'm going to read it off for our audio listeners. Legislative definitions of a federal agency are varied and even contradictory. The official United States government manual offers no definition, while the Administrative Procedure Act defines definition of agency applies to most executive branch agencies. Congress may define an agency however it chooses in enabling legislation, and through the subsequent litigation, often involving the Freedom of Information Act and the Government and Sunshine Acts. These further cloud attempts to enumerate a list of agencies. Basically, what they're saying here is, if you've ever been to a Wikipedia article of list of anything, a lot of the articles will say, this list is incomplete. You could complete it or you could help complete it by expanding it. What they're trying to admit here is that this is quite possibly an incomplete list of federal agencies.
So we're going to, now all we're going to do is we're going to slowly scroll through this, and then we're going to have to go, it's so massive that we have to go to a separate web page to actually dig into some of the agencies. But as you're just scrolling down right now, Hamilton, this is Department of Agriculture, and I'm going to start to read some of this off. You have the Office of Human Resources Management, Office of Safety and Security Protection, Office of Ethics, Office of Hearing and Appeals, Office of Administrative Law, Office of Inspector General, Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement, Office of General Counsel, Office of the Chief Information Officer, Office of the Chief Financial Officer, Undersecretary of Agriculture for Farm Production and Conservation, Farm Service Agency, Commodity Credit Corporation, Natural Resources Conservation Service, Risk Management Agency, Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, Undersecretary of Agriculture for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services, Food and Nutrition Services, Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, Undersecretary for Agriculture for Food Safety, Undersecretary of Agriculture for Marketing and Regulatory Programs, Federal Grain Inspection Service, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Plant Protection and Quarantine, Wildlife Services. We're not even done. We're not even halfway done. This is one agency. One agency.
One department.
Excuse me, one department. One department. All right? We have the Undersecretary for Agriculture, Research, Education, and Economics, Undersecretary for Rural Development, Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. One department. Then you get a Department of Commerce. Same thing. Office of General Counsel, Legislative and Intergovernment Affairs, Public Affairs, Security, White House Liaison, Inspector General, Economic Development Administration, Minority Business Development Agency, National Technical Information Services, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, Institute for Telecommunication Sciences, Undersecretary for Commerce for Industry and Security, Bureau of Industry and Security, Undersecretary for Commerce of Economic Affairs, Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property, United States Patent and Trademark Office, Undersecretary for Commerce for International Trade, International Trade Administration, Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, National Ocean. Holy crap. Like, it just goes on. And then under each one of these undersecretaries, there's a whole bunch of other positions. There's a whole bunch of other, what you might call bureaus or agencies or whatever it is. And then you get into the you can imagine, like it's insane. There's just too much to go through. So let's switch over to this other site. And here's what we're going to do. We're just going to break this down by spending. All right. So at the top of the list, budgetary resources, $3.2 trillion. We have the Department of Treasury. Now, again, the Treasury runs the Mint, the Treasury runs the IRS, the Treasury runs the Secret Service. The Treasury also manages a lot, some of the spending that goes out for, checks and things like that.
Stimulus checks.
Yeah. So it has a huge budget, right? Like right now it's listening to this is, I think, 24% of, I think it's not discretionary, it's something else, but let's start with, let's do this. All right. So the Department of Treasury does make sense constitutionally to have a Department of Treasury, but do this, Hamilton, do a right click and make a separate tab for this. Cause I want to kind of show what this, and by the way, this page is usaspending.gov. So this is a government website. It's not like we went to, something crazy. Go ahead and click on that one. All right. So what's the agency mission? The agency mission of the Department of Treasury is to maintain a strong economy and create economic and job opportunities by promoting the conditions that enable economic growth and stability at home and abroad, strengthen the national security by combating threats, and protecting the integrity of the financial system, and manage the U.S. government's finances and resources effectively. Does this really sound? I mean, think about all the discussions we've had about the United States Constitution, about the founding, about the Declaration of Independence, about Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. When they were going to set up a Department of Treasury, you could probably imagine, like, okay, sure, the federal government takes in money, and it's got to be someone, and the federal government has the sole responsibility for managing the currency for the United States. So, okay, yeah, it would make sense to have a Department of Treasury. Scroll back up, please. Does anybody imagine, with the possible exception of Alexander Hamilton, that any of the founding fathers, Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers, any signers of the Declaration, that any of them would have said, what we need a Department of Treasury that is going to maintain a strong economy and create economic job opportunities by promoting the conditions that enable economic growth, managing the financial system, combating
threats.
threats.
Like Alexander Hamilton wrote this.
Why is the Treasury trying to create anything?
Because our federal government has been colonized by Keynesians. That's why.
Exactly. Why is the federal government, again, if you want to create economic and job opportunities by promoting the conditions that enable economic growth, great. Cut your department in half and stop trying to manipulate and micromanage the economy. Like let's think about this. I don't think they ever bother to ask the question, okay, what promotes economic growth? Okay, I would argue that what promotes economic growth is when you have things like property rights and free markets. You have freedom to exchange. So essentially you significantly limit the amount of regulatory and tax burden that you have on business, right? You limit it to just the very bare necessities to raise revenue for legitimate functions of government. And you reduce regulations to the very bare minimum to where people are not engaging in things like fraud or deception, right? But other than that, you allow people to figure out what sort of products and services customers want, to be able to build businesses, to be able to provide those products and services. I've seen, like, Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations and was considered one of the fathers of capitalism and the whole deal. He conceded, I don't necessarily, but he conceded that, okay, government has an interest in infrastructure projects, that government should actually play a role in infrastructure projects and making sure that you have good roads, canals, ports, harbors, things like that. Okay, fine. If you wanted to promote economic development, theoretically, you could say that facilitating greater transportation across the country would help do that. But why would that fall under the Department of the Treasury? It wouldn't. The Department of Treasury should be there to manage the mint. and maybe a few other minor roles. But to take on this massive responsibility of we're going to promote economic growth. Well, what does that look like? Well, it looks like whatever the politicians that are currently in charge think promoting economic growth looks like. And it usually comes with providing perverse incentives by handing out money that have the best political connections. That's what this is. So I would massively, I would keep the Department of Treasury, but I would massively reform it, and I would significantly reduce it. All right, let's go. I want to jump to one here real quick. Go back to the other one. There we go. Let's look at Department of Agriculture. So, by the way, Department of Treasury, $3.2 trillion budget. Department of Agriculture, $495 billion. $495 billion. So go ahead and bring up agriculture. All right. What is the agency mission of the Department of USDA. We provide leadership on food, agricultural, natural resources, rural development, nutrition, and related issues based on sound public policy, the best available science, and efficient management. Now, keep in mind with a $80 billion budget, $490 billion budget, $495 billion budget. That's what they're handing out. Now, what you don't know is that in a lot of these programs, there's other things that fall into it. I want to say that some like the food stamps and stuff like that fell under USDA.
Huge chunk of the Department of Agriculture's budget is going to the food and nutrition service.
Yeah. So when you're thinking Department of Agriculture, you're probably thinking, oh, these guys provide assistance with respect to farming. Right. And maybe they provide some guidance, and maybe they provide a central repository of where a grading system on the meats, or they assist if there's some sort of like maybe outbreak or whatnot among cattle, like mad cow disease. Like that. That's what they actually do. But instead, they have billions upon billions of dollars in their budget dedicated to things that arguably have very, very little to do with what you're probably imagining they do within agriculture. And that's why if you look at how I feel about agriculture, what would I would do? I would give it to good ranchers. I would let good ranchers just totally replace Department of Agriculture. Now, why would I do this? Well, because while the Department of Agriculture is handing out billions of dollars in other people's money, while the Department of Agriculture is not exactly being honest with respect to where my meat comes from, because it can be raised somewhere else, brought to the United States, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's American. Why? Because you stuck an American flag on the packaging at the last step of the process. When I'm frustrated about the lack of processing plants that they apparently can't open up more of with their huge budget of $490-something billion, when all that's going on, you know who's not letting me down when it comes to getting quality meat at a good price? Good ranchers. Good ranchers has somehow figured out, right, without a budget of $495 billion confiscated from taxpayers, right? Good ranchers somehow figured out how to connect the consumer, right, with the rancher in order to get a quality product at a price that everyone agreed on. Do you know how much money that Good Ranchers has confiscated from customers? Zero, baby. Zero. People voluntarily hand over their money to get quality meat, quality pork, quality beef, quality poultry, quality seafood delivered to their door, right? And how do you know it's good? Well, I'll tell you this much. Because of the commitment Good Ranchers has to working with American-based farmers who engage in the best practices possible. Now, let me ask you this. I trust my local farmer whose entire livelihood depends on providing me with a good product far more than I do some academic working at a federal bureaucracy that has probably never actually been to a farm, right? And here's the best part about it. If you don't like what they do, you don't got to do business with them. If you don't like what the Department of Agriculture does, tough. You're handing over your money anyways because it's taxed. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to cut funding over here. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put it back into the hands of consumers so that you can go out and you can go and do business with people like Good Ranchers who are doing business with American farmers to be able to get the best products possible to your table. High quality, good pricing. And now, if you use our promo code Nick, you will not only get $25 off your order, you will not only get free shipping, but if you sign up for one of the subscriptions, which, by the way, combating inflation, you can lock into a particular price, you will also get 2 pounds of ground beef free. I believe, what is that, every month?
Every shipment.
Every shipment. On top of that, is the USDA doing that for you? Probably not. They're taking your money, and what are they doing? They're giving it to other people, and then they're coming up with
Probably
ridiculous
to
programs.
farmers in Argentina.
Can I point out something kind of interesting here?
What?
Is that every single agency that you bring up at the very, very, very top, would you mind scrolling back up on this a little bit? At the very, very top, it says includes COVID-19 spending.
Yeah. And
Is
this is 2023.
COVID-19 spending something that we just attach to every single budget now?
Well, why do you want people to die, Tina? Is that what you want? You want people to die?
Have you ever seen that video?
You know, if the Department of Agriculture can't hand out COVID-19 money, then
people will die.
everyone will die. Everyone.
Have you seen that clip?
Do you want
of
Hamilton to look at Hamilton, honey? Look at Hamilton's
But
life. Do
it's
you want him to die?
interesting that the USDA, Department of Agriculture, needs COVID-19 spending in 2023.
Oh, every element of the federal government needs COVID.
Yeah.
Every element of the federal government needs more spending. We have a couple super chats. One that I want to read off that was actually kind of interesting. The Shipbuilding Observer says, strong economy, my butt. After adjusting for inflation, as a mechanical engineer with HII, that's Huntington Ingalls Industries, which, by the way, is the only manufacturer of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in the United States, in Newport News shipyard.
Yeah, Virginia.
Here in Virginia. That's cool. Virginia has the power to construct nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Anyway, he goes on to say, I have less buying power than the average household in 1933. But Thanos takes priority. Also, happy birthday, Nick.
Thank you very much. No, it's the frustration should be real with all this, because again, when you hear Department of Agriculture, and when somebody says, hey, look, I don't know that the Department of Agriculture needs to have a budget of $495 billion, the argument that you get back is not, well, you know what, let's do a close audit and see. I mean, obviously we have a $1.6 trillion deficit. That's pretty bad on top of $32 trillion in debt. Yeah, we probably should look at what are these programs. No. You just get told you hate farmers. Right? God help you if you have any criticism of the Farm Bill.
There's which is so funny because there's almost nothing the Department of Agriculture actually does that helps farmers.
So they would argue, because a lot of it is like the Farm Bill is a good example of this. A lot of it is subsidization to farmers. And the argument is that we're subsidizing American farmers to help them to be able to compete in a highly competitive global environment. Plus, we're keeping prices down on agricultural products. The thing that people need to understand, though, is no, you haven't kept price down. So you've hidden the costs, because what you've done is you've taxed $495 billion. And then to the extent that you're actually giving it to farmers to be able to plant, or in many cases to not plant, let's keep this in mind. During the Great Depression, when people were literally going hungry, this idea that we've got millions of people in America going hungry, we've got program on top of program on top of program. If they're going hungry, it's because they haven't been led to one of these programs to utilize it, not because the programs don't exist. But during the 30s, during the Great Depression, when people were literally going hungry, the federal government, all right, was paying farmers not to grow crops, or they were buying up excess crops and then destroying them. It's not like they were taking them over to the soup kitchens. So this is the part where I look at this, I'm like, I'm sorry, this is not the way to run agriculture. We are creating perverse incentives where we actually have farmers now that, because of the regulations, because of the rules, because of everything else they have to follow, because of the taxes, they become less competitive. Because here's what people need to understand. When it comes to actual agricultural production in the world, the United States is third. Number one, I believe, is China. Number two is India. Those two are probably going to switch here pretty soon. But most of that is subsistence farming, right? They use it for their own consumption. The United States may be third in overall agricultural production, but we are number one in export. We are number one in exporting. We are the breadbasket of a significant portion of the world. And it's because our farming is so efficient. We can get a lot more out of the acres with the tools and the equipment and everything else that we use. American farmers are far more efficient. However, when you look at all the rules, when you look at all the regulations, when you look at the bottlenecks within the system, right, the way that the government addresses that is they say, well, we'll just give you more money. We'll just subsidize you to do X, Y, and Z. Or we'll pay you to grow more corn for ethanol,
And
even though that's not what the market demands.
Farm subsidies tend to be the one that everyone goes, oh, well, we like the farm subsidies. We don't want to subsidize all this other stuff, but we like the farm subsidies. I actually had a conservative farmer actually say, you guys have no idea what it really costs to farm, and you don't want to pay the food costs of real farming if those subsidies went away.
Yeah.
My answer to that is, yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Well,
it's like you're taking my money one way or another. Like, I'd rather know what it actually costs to buy the thing I want as opposed to having a politician taking it, running it through a massive federal bureaucracy. Because how much of that $495 billion is actually overhead in managing buildings, managing people, running healthcare programs for, whatever. Like that's all being utilized for things that aren't directly related to actually agriculture. And Angel D points this out, and thank you for the super chat. USDA was originally founded to protect the integrity of our food. Now it is a captive agency for shady labels and to promote crap processed food. P.S. Happy birthday, Nick, and thank you all for a great podcast. Thank you very much, Angel. No, I think that there is a huge problem now, and this is one of the issues that we always have with federal agencies, is that you can tag whatever positive sounding mission statement you want on a federal agency. That doesn't mean it's going to conduct itself in just the most perfect ethical way in order to achieve the end state. I mean, can I ask this question? Is it ideal to have a federal agency dealing with agriculture? Wouldn't it be better if we had private institutions, private organizations that were working in conjunction with one another, that you could join if you thought they were valuable and that you could leave if you thought they were not valuable? Wouldn't it be better if $495 billion was recaptured in the economy based off of what people actually want out of goods and services? And then when it came to agriculture, organizations and institutions, and we have things like the Farm Bureau, right? We have things like VICVA, and we have like the smaller farm consumers as well. The problem is that when you have these massive agencies, what you end up doing is you end up incentivizing farmers to work within the agency in order to get the money that they're handing out, as opposed to focusing on what is the best way to actually produce the product. I love that they think that we're using the best available science and efficient management. I'm sure on some levels, that's not to say that the people at USDA have never come up with good ideas for, how to do ground cover crops in order to prevent the dust from going. Like, I get it. But you're honestly telling me the only way that we can do that is through a $495 billion agency. I don't buy that.
All right, so axe the entire Department of Agriculture. Problem solved. That's 100,000 jobs at the federal government that we eliminate, 100,000 pensions that we eliminate, also hundreds of billions of dollars that we save. I don't think there's a single thing in the Department of Agriculture that we should keep at all. It was founded in the Civil War, and everybody has this idea that it pushes something that, quite frankly, it doesn't. It's mostly a mechanism to promote welfare.
Yeah.
And then the other side that it does is it manages the Forest Service, which, by the way, I don't think the federal government should be owning those lands anyway.
Well, and this goes back to and Thomas Sowell. If you want an idea, Thomas Sowell talks about, again, his time interning in the federal government out of college and talking about the distribution of welfare and actually wanting to do it. And he did this as a Marxist, wanting to do a careful analysis on whether or not these programs were actually yielding the sort of returns they wanted.
And they were not interested.
And what he found was the federal agency, the department he worked for, was not at all interested. In fact, they wanted to squash that because if it would have come back that the agency was actually doing something that was counterproductive to their mission, it would cost them a significant portion of their budget. So that's the important thing to remember. It's not that every single federal employee working in this is a bad, nefarious person that is just trying to get over on the system. Right. But when you have systems where there's perverse incentives inherent in the way that they operate, you can't be surprised when that has negative effects both on the agency itself and the industry it's attempting to control. All right. So,
by the way, can I stress something, that there's a difference between budgetary resources and the actual amount of money that they spent. So, for example, the Treasury Department does not have a budget of $3.2 trillion.
Yeah, they have resources.
A huge amount of, like 90% of that. I mean, the Treasury Department's actual budget is like $16 billion.
Yeah.
The rest of that is the same thing with the Department of Agriculture. I actually looked it up. The Department of Agriculture's budget is about half of what this number is. It's actually still a huge number. It's actually $242 billion.
Yeah.
So
and that's fair. We should distinguish between budgetary resources versus.
I might actually read through some of these a little bit more as we get to each agency. But like so Nick, I guess the verdict is, what would you do with the Department of Agriculture before we move on to the next department?
I don't see why we need to have a federal Department of Agriculture. I just don't. Again, go to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and explain to me why we have this agency. Why do we have this department? And you can say all day long, well, it's going to help coordinate. Why? Why do you need, think about this for a second. Why do you need federal politicians and federal bureaucrats coordinating agricultural output? Why do you need that? At best, constitutionally, the only thing that you could actually use to justify this is you could say, well, when it comes to international trade. Okay, if that's what you want, then what this is an incredibly, infinitesimally small department which provides some data to the federal government when they're negotiating trade deals. That's what it does. It doesn't sit there and try to tell farmers what to do. It doesn't sit there and try to say that this is the best practice and you should do this. Because what they're also doing is they're not just saying, hey, we got together and we had a bunch of people look at this and we discovered that we think this might be the best approach in order to grow whatever, industrial hemp. That's not what they're doing. They're then providing incentive programs, which says that if you do it the way the USDA wants you to do, you get benefits. And if you don't do it the way the USDA wants you, you don't get benefits.
Well, doesn't the USDA also control doesn't some of this have to do with the free lunch programs and things like that?
Well, that's what we said. I can't speak to every single individual program that they do, but they manage a lot with respect to what we used to call food stamps or EBT or that sort of assistance programs. That falls within the Department of Agriculture, which I think is a weird place to put it. That doesn't make any sense. Well, no, that's the point.
Because half the stuff that is being purchased with this stuff isn't produce.
So what's the next department that you want to go through?
Well, Rob Bickles said, thank you for the super chat. It says USDA prioritizes along racial lines as well. As a fourth generation farmer rancher, I support demolishing the USDA. This is an important part too, because people always have this idea that, well, if you're against a federal agency, you must be against the people that the federal agency is ostensibly supposed to be helping. No, I think it's the opposite. I think that a lot of these federal agencies create an environment where it actually makes it harder for the people in those industries. All right, let's go to Department of Defense, because there's going to be a lot of people thinking, oh, well, Nick's a Republican, conservative. You don't want to talk about all the waste within the Department of Defense. Oh, don't I? Right? So
I'll tell you the first thing that needs to be cut from the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
All of those secret programs that the UFO whistleblower told us about.
So the important thing to understand about this, again, when it says budgetary resources, right, that doesn't mean that's its whole budget, right? It's $1.77 trillion in budgetary resources. I think their actual budget is somewhere around $800 billion.
How much did they spend on that stupid ad a few years back where it was like, my mom?
Oh gosh, I don't know, but that was so pathetic.
the super woke LGBT.
Yes. Yeah, they did one. The CIA did one too on this lady that just was talking about all of her mental illnesses. And I was like, why would we be like, and then they did a commercial for the CIA. And what did they do? Did they do ground branch? Did they do covert operations? Did they do intel analysis? No, they did someone that was like the EO rep at the CIA. As if when you're thinking CIA, you're thinking, one day I want to be an EO rep, but at the CIA. That's where I want to be the equal opportunity rep.
I know the Department of Defense has a budget of just just about $800 billion. I think it's just under that.
Yeah.
Although, according to the federal government, they have resources of up to $1.77 trillion.
So you got the Department of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Defense Logistics Agency, Defense Health Agency, Missile Defense Agency, Defense and Information Systems Agency, U.S. Transcom. Oh, Transcom. Washington Headquarters Service. That's transportation, people. And U.S. Special Operations Command. So I spent...
Oh, the first thing that needs to be cut, other than the UFO thing, is the Department of the Air Force, because that's actually unconstitutional.
Because the Constitution lays out for an Army and a Navy, nothing in there about
Put
the
it
Air
back
Force.
into the Army Air Corps.
Well, it used to be the Army
I
Air
agree.
Corps.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I would say with the Department of Defense. I think that there needs to be. There's already been several audits of the Department of Defense, and what we repeatedly find is that they don't do a very good job in accounting. Now, obviously, there's probably some things that are black ops, off book sort of stuff, but that really raises a question with respect to congressional oversight. And you actually saw this during the UFO hearings where someone said they wanted to enact the Holman Rule. And the Holman Rule, was it the Holman? I think it's Holman Rule. Holman Rule has only been used 4 times in U.S. history, but it's essentially when Congress comes in and they're trying to get information on how money is being spent within a department, and the department is essentially slow rolling it or obstructing it. And so what they do is they say, fine, until we get the information that we want in order to fulfill our constitutional responsibility for oversight, we're going to cut line items from the budget for the departments that we're talking about or individual positions. So if they think the commander of this particular unit or whatnot is the one that's holding it up, fine. We just cut the funding for your position until we get the information. It's pretty cool.
It's a very rarely used because it's so dangerous. It could be taken out of, neither side historically likes to use it because, you create an arms race, when that happens. But No, that's a good example. Obviously, though, unlike the Department of Agriculture and some of these other departments we're going to get to, I really doubt that you're going to say get rid of the Department of Defense.
I don't think we should get rid of the Department of Defense. I think that a couple things I think people need to understand that a lot of the reasons why we have waste in defense has to do with the industries behind them. So let's be intellectually honest about this, okay? Some of the foreign aid that we send overseas, all right, especially some of the military aid that we spend overseas, goes in the form of us sending them U.S. military style equipment. Like there's a model that we use, and then there's an export model. And so when we give foreign aid, a lot of the times what we're doing is we're giving an allied nation access to our defense industry, right? But an export version of it, so it's not as good, right? They get that. Okay, so the question we need to ask ourselves on some of this stuff is that if we're actually fighting with these allies, or if we're trying to keep them in our camp in order to, maintain a balance of power or whatnot, can that be a reasonable expenditure of resources? I would argue that it can under certain conditions. Now, do I believe it's gotten out of hand, especially when you have congressional leaders that are essentially saying, I don't want you to get rid of this program that you of the military have already said you don't want anymore because the plant for making whatever it is in my district, and it's going to mean jobs for my district. That is not an appropriate allocation of resources when it comes to it. So what I'm saying here is that this isn't just me trashing the DOD. It's not just me trashing the executive branch. Congress is entirely complicit in creating perverse incentives in the way defense dollars are spent, so that they're spent not to give us the best and most powerful military in the world, but it's spent in order to make sure that they're bringing home the bacon to their particular district. And I think that's very problematic. So I think what needs to happen is there needs to be accountability on the auditing of defense allocation. And we definitely need to see an overall, I would say, a cut in the defense budget. I wouldn't cut anything having to do with training soldiers, equipping soldiers, paying soldiers. I wouldn't do anything like that. But when it comes to a lot of
so much overhead,
our foreign expenditures and some of the other stuff that we're doing, I'm looking at this going, no, I don't get it. Again, I get some of it. I don't get all of it. And so I would definitely reduce and reform the defense budget. No question. No question.
Tim Burchett actually bringing up the UFO hearing again, that the Pentagon gets audited every year. And every year since he has first served in Congress, they've utterly failed that audit.
Yeah.
So I think that it's totally, acceptable for conservatives to say, yeah, there's money that you can cut from the defense budget that doesn't impact our ability to, wage and conduct wars if they need to be done. Like if China invaded Taiwan, right, or the United States was attacked or somebody like that, I don't think that there's any conservative that says that we shouldn't have the strongest, most powerful military in the world, but you can do that without some of the fraud, waste, and abuse that you see within the military-industrial complex. So I think I think that we're kind of on the same page there in terms of the Defense Department. What's the next one that you want to talk about?
Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, I would get rid of the whole thing. Are you going to get rid of? Is there any that you would completely axe altogether?
Yeah, we already talked about agriculture. We're going to get to several other.
You
this is going to be a quick conversation.
And then you came back and said, well, maybe just a tiny little thing.
Well, no, okay, yeah.
I
went from a $280 billion budget to like something that would be like $1 million to run like one office to do one thing to help with trade assistance.
So he said, get rid of agriculture. We've talked about Treasury. We're not getting rid of Treasury.
No, but we'd significantly reduce it to essentially managing the mint. I don't even think Secret Service belongs in the Treasury. That's never made sense to me.
Actually, the reason that it did was because originally the Secret Service was kind of I believe a counterfeit task force that then over time evolved into what it currently is.
It's just a strange thing. Department of Homeland Security. Here's what you need to know about the Department of Homeland Security, right? There's a lot of things like U.S. Customs and Border Protection now falls under Department of Homeland Security. You have the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is the largest part of the budget. And I will say this, I think FEMA is a huge problem. Everybody looks at FEMA as like, well, no, you need a national disaster response team or whatnot. Okay, but FEMA influences a lot of things with respect to how aid dollars are spent, with respect to how insurance is affected on things. It's like when you can actually, John Stossel did a really good report on this, where it's like, I can be like a multi-millionaire and I can get special insurance rates to build beachfront property along a hurricane alley, like because of FEMA. And so I think there's problems with the way that we do that. Again, I don't know. When it comes to Federal Emergency Management Agency, the other thing that I think is a problem is that we've created these conditions to where anytime something happens, every congressman is immediately going out there trying to get it declared a federal disaster area. in order to get resources from the federal government. So here's the thing that I would just ask people to consider when you're looking at something like FEMA. Because a lot of people say, well, why wouldn't you want some sort of agency that's responsible for coordinating federal assets and state assets in order to help out with a national disaster? I could actually see a reasonable play for that. But when you now create this incentive structure to declare federal disaster areas and maybe areas that it doesn't make sense. Let me give you an example. We had the earthquake in Mineral, Virginia, right? I've been in some pretty big earthquakes. This was not a big earthquake. We didn't have massive built structural damage and skyscrapers and bridges collapsing. We just didn't have that. We had chimneys breaking. It was declared a federal disaster area. Why? Because the congressman felt obligated, right, to try. We got to support our people. I got to support my constituents. I got to get the money in here. Got to get the resources in here. The question is that in order to get the resources to FEMA in the first place, you had to give them this massive budget. You give them this massive power. And then what do you once again do? You cause everybody to look toward the federal government to solve something that really should have been a state issue. Really should have been a state issue. So would I completely get rid of FEMA? No. Would I really change with respect to what it's responsible for? Yes. TSA, I would get rid of. I would get rid of the TSA. That also falls within the Homeland Security budget.
It's crazy. We're all so used to getting, groped at the airport now that it's hard to remember a time when you just walked to your gate and just got on the plane.
Do you remember flying before TSA?
I don't.
Do you remember?
Well, my parents are divorced, so I would fly as an unaccompanied minor as a kid before 9/11, back and forth between my mother and father. Very faint memory of pre 9/11 style screening, but I do remember it. But it's very
if you were picking
I was
somebody,
6 when 9/11 happened.
If you were picking somebody up from the airport, you could walk right to their gate and wait for them to get off the airplane.
I remember my dad would before 9/11. My dad would be there.
Well, if you're an unaccompanied minor, you still get to do that.
As soon as I walked out of, but none of the type of screening stuff and security that they have today. I remember walking out of the gate and he would be literally right there. Today it's a mess what they've got today. But I honestly, quite frankly, I don't think that we should have a Department of Homeland Security in an era of increased weaponization of the federal government against its own people.
So the argument for it is, and this came after 9/11, and so the concern is that we have all these agencies that are operating independently of one another, and therefore they're not sharing information as well as they could be. So if we put it all within a particular department, then now these agencies have a home that makes sense for the purpose of securing the homeland. The question that I would ask is, how's that working out for us? Are we happy with what's going on at the border? Are we happy with what's going on at the airports? Do we think that's become a good exchange for the additional money and everything else? And so my argument is no. I don't think that a Department of Homeland Security or adding one more bureaucracy on top of everything else has been overall beneficial to the even the coordination of these various agencies. Now, if somebody wants to make an argument, fine, I'll be happy to hear it. But I do think it's interesting that when you look at the obligations versus total budgetary resources within Department of Homeland Security, you have Customs and Border Patrol, United States Coast Guard, TSA, U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. You have Citizenship and Immigration Services, Security Enforcement and Investigations, Management Directorate, United States Secret Service, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Who did
all of those?
Who did the citizenship stuff before Homeland Security was a thing?
It was that. So that agency or that group would have done it, but then they put it underneath Homeland Security. So the Coast Guard doesn't fall within Department of Defense. It falls within DHS.
Oh, okay.
Before DHS was created, the Coast Guard was part of the Department of Transportation.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So to give you an idea, though, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol has a $15.89 billion obligations, $28.3 billion in budgetary resources. FEMA has $36 billion and $81 billion, respectively. So FEMA is twice the size of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. And again, I kind of look at I kind of look at these agencies. This is one of the problems that happens when you throw all these agencies within a particular department, is that they look at whichever one has the highest budget within there, and that ends up being a main focus of it. Curtis Horn says, use some of the defense budget and all of the ATF budget to fund and expand the CMP. CMP.
Customs and
are they CMP or CBP? Thank you for the super chat, Curtis. But I might need some. All right, so I would significantly reduce the size scope, and I don't think we need an overall Department of Homeland Security. Some of that we need a Customs and Border Patrol.
By the way, thank you for the donation, Joe. He didn't have any message, although his message has balloons, so I'm assuming that he's wishing you a happy birthday.
And it was his first super chat. Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate it, man. We also appreciate the super chat from Isaiah as well. I can think of 2 big reasons not to get rid of TSA. I can't. But, all right, so let's go ahead and go to our next agency here. I want to go to the Department of Energy. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I would totally get rid of this.
By the way, just to clarify, when I said I would get rid of the Department of Homeland Security, that doesn't mean I think that we should be getting rid of like Customs and Border Patrol.
Yeah, no.
I think that some sub-agencies within Homeland Security should be removed. But overall, the department, I would prefer us to go back to the system that we previously had where all those agencies, you go through the list and you either act some of them all together. Like, I don't think that we should have a FEMA, for example. Or some of these agencies should go back to their original responsibilities. Like Customs and Border Patrol, I think should go back to, I believe that was actually part of the Department of the Treasury. Like the Coast Guard, part of me thinks that shouldn't that actually be under the Department of Defense?
I mean,
I guess you're splitting hairs at that point. But the fact is that if you consolidated these, part of the problem that we have is we have too many agencies that are kind of doing not just mutually contradictory, but also mutual overlap, where you just have bureaucratic creep, where you have so many agencies and departments now.
Then you have people fighting over what their actual job is. And like, I look at the Department of Energy, and when we look at this, you can click onto it. The agency mission, the mission of the Energy Department is to ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing its energy, environmental, and nuclear challenges through transformative science and technology solutions. So once again, we've put a federal bureaucracy in charge of developing, or addressing challenges through the transformative science and technology solutions. When you think innovation, when you think technological advancement, do you really think federal bureaucracy?
When I think of cutting edge technology, I think of the DMV.
That's right. Bam. They just nailed it.
Although I have to say, our DMV in Culpeper is actually really good.
Well, it's the only DMV I've ever seen in my life that's actually somewhat efficient.
And the people are super nice. Like,
They
I
are.
have never had.
Well, very lucky.
By the way,
Very
Curtis
lucky.
clarified. He goes, the civilian marksmanship program. Okay, I love it, man. I love it. That's what he's saying. Like, cut those budgets, get in the civilian marksmanship program. So here's the thing. If you want to see a really good report on this, because I'm not going to deep dive into it, but if you want to see a really good report, go look at what John Stossel did on the Department of Energy. Because when you look at it, the Department of Energy's goal, right, to ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing its energy and environmental and nuclear challenges, the Department of Energy makes it more expensive to get U.S. energy. They do. It's a very expensive. Again, they got $52.57 billion in total obligations right now. And, some of the stuff, they have energy programs, National Nuclear Security Administration, Environmental and Other Defense, Power Marketing Administration, Department Administration. I'm sorry, when I look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, now again, energy wasn't a thing in the same way that it is now. So if you want to make the argument that this could fall theoretically within the necessary and proper clause, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to see justification for it, because when I look at what the DOE has actually done, I'm sorry, I don't see them as having done a great job in actually securing like U.S. energy independence. We're more dependent than we certainly should be at this point. And part of that is because the Department of Energy makes it more difficult for the United States to actually produce our own energy.
Well, doesn't the Department of Energy just have a bunch of, we have all this environmental stuff that has seeped into every single aspect of our government.
Yeah.
And so now the Department of Energy has nothing to do necessarily with, being energy independent and having good, quality energy, to all of its people kind of thing. Instead, it's how are ways that we can slice and dice this up into a bunch of industrial solar fields and incentivize people to have these giant props in the middle of, fields, cutting up all the birds and screwing up flight patterns. I mean, there is a lot that is involved in this that is also environmental.
Yeah. I got to read this real quick. Claire said, can I be your all daughter's best friend? I'm 15 and I'm 100% sure that any girl raised by Tina is freaking awesome. Hello from Texas. That's awesome, Claire.
Our daughter's 15 as well.
Yeah.
One of them.
Yeah. All right. So I'm cutting Department of Energy. Anybody want to keep it?
No, let's get rid of it.
Nobody wants to keep it. Okay. How about let's move
wouldn't
on.
it be great if it really was that easy? Nah, let's get rid of it.
We're done. Well, again, I'm king today. So this is my birthday. I get to cut what I want. For my birthday, these are my presents. All right. Department of Education.
Oh, immediately. We don't even need a discussion on that. Immediately remove that entire agency.
Agency's mission. The Department of Education's mission is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. Well, bang up job. Total obligations so much. How much this agency planned to spend? $111.32 billion in total obligations.
Since their inception, what has our ranking in the world done? Has it gone up or has it gone down?
It's not even that. It's where on earth in the Constitution is there any sort of authorization for the federal government to have any input on education policy at all? Mm-hmm. At all. There's literally nothing in Article 1, Section 8 that says that the federal government or Congress has oversight when it comes to the way that people are supposed to be raising their children. Mm-hmm. That's an individual, local, and at most state responsibility. Yeah. The federal government should be spending $0 on anything related to and you know what's funny? The way that they do it is the federal government will hand out money supposedly for education, but there'll be so many strings attached that then suddenly we're going to wake up one day being like, why is it mandated that, they're teaching about transing kids in kindergarten? Oh, because it's in the federal government's, budget. It's attached, that's attached to all the, the strings that are attached to the money that the federal government
gives
and
that's
states.
One of the reasons why you're seeing this crap happen all across everywhere, including rural America, because everybody has strings attached to the money.
Well, no, I think
so. They all have to implement it.
This is another thing. When you say, I don't think we need a federal Department of Education, what a lot of people hear is like, oh, you don't support education. What they don't hear, and here's the way I want people to think about it. What if we had $111 billion that all went back to the communities that they were taken from in order to run it through a massive federal bureaucracy? What if we just said for a moment, we said, you know what? We don't need a federal department that's going to come up with specific products or programs and whatnot that they want to push. We're not going to do that. We're just going to take this money and we're going to allocate it specifically for educational resources. Now, you go ask any teacher in any school right now, would you rather the federal dollars just come back to you in the form of like a blanket grant for education to be determined based off of, how your local school district thinks it should be spent? Or do you think it should come with a bunch of strings attached from the federal government? I don't know a single teacher would be like, no, I really want the strings attached from the federal government. But yet we've been told that the only way that you can support, now again, I'm not saying that would be the best way to do it. What I'm saying is that if people would start to think it's not $111 billion that then disappears from education, it's $111 billion that now gets spent in education far more effectively and efficiently based off of what people actually want to see out of the program as opposed to what politicians at the federal level think they should see.
But that's not the point. The point is that they can control what people are learning and what people are thinking, and that's why there's all the strings attached to the money, is because it's basically extortion. We're going to give you back this money, but you're going to have to do this in order to get it. And this goes back to my solution for all of this. Okay, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. I think that the federal government should not be collecting any tax whatsoever. I think the states should be collecting the taxes, and then the states should be paying the federal government for the federal government's side of what they're required to do. But most of the money, should stay at the state level, and that would give states the ability to tell the federal government to back off of what the state's allowed to do and what they're supposed to do.
That requires getting rid of the 16th Amendment because you described the state almost. I mean, the federal government did actually collect taxes before the 16th Amendment, but they collected it through tariffs.
Yeah.
Well,
and those weren't handed over by the states.
I think if you're leveling taxes on your citizens aside from tariffs, okay? If you're leveling taxes, income taxes, or any other tax like that, all of that should be collected at the state level. And then the states will be taxed appropriately from the federal government in order to maintain the federal government for only legitimate functions of government. And that would give states a lot more power with the federal government, which is supposed to be how it is.
Yeah. I look, I have no problem with that arrangement. As it currently stands, when I look at the Department of Education, the only reason why we actually have it is because of the 16th Amendment. Because again, the federal government has no constitutional authority to mandate to states or localities what they should teach in classrooms. So how do they get away with it? 16th Amendment gives them taxing authority that allows them to tax individuals directly.
They hold your money hostage.
And so they hold your money hostage. You don't get your money back. How many times have I seen this in the state legislature? Well, Nick, we've got to go with this. Otherwise, we're not going to get the federal funds. Nick, we're leaving those dollars on the table. Like, yeah, but those dollars come with
a lot of strings
dollars
attached.
come with strings attached. Right? You're not just getting your money back. You're giving something up to get your money back. That's problematic. So why don't we just get rid of the agency taking our money, right? Or justifying the taking of our money, and instead allow it to stay within the communities. Now, if you want to come up with a better way to allocate that at the state level, you're constitutionally permitted to do that. But I don't see a role for this at the federal government. So I say axe the Department of Education.
I would get rid of the entire thing, mostly because the overwhelming majority of the Department of Education's budget is basically going to subsidize college indoctrination at this point. Yeah. There's no reason as conservatives that we should be funding our opposition, and it's time for conservatives to recognize that the university structure that we have right now, 90% of the university structure is actively working to indoctrinate students into believing effectively a form of Marxism. Like, name me one example of the left using taxpayer money to fund their ideological opposition.
Yeah.
There's not a single one. How much money does NAGR or Students for Life or any other conservative organization get from taxpayers?
Oh, yeah.
Nothing. And yet conservatives willingly elect people to office who then vote to fork over their taxpayer funding to pay for, I went to public school and I went to college. And I can tell you, I have learned more from watching YouTube videos than I did from going and spending 3.5 years. I graduated early, 3.5 years getting an undergrad degree in poli-sci and history. Like, the classes that they take, it's just Marxism at this point. Unless you're going to medical school or engineering or something like that, where you're actually providing like a tangible skill that you actually need to be educated on in order to provide it. All of the humanities, liberal arts, all that stuff, it's great topics. I love it. Huge fan of it, but the university system has been completely colonized by Marxists, and we're funding
even in those like medical everything.
And it's increasingly in there as well, and we are funding our ideological opposition. There is no again. It's a third of the entire Department of Education's funding is just Pell Grants.
Well, here's what people also understand. So with in 2023, like I'm looking at a wiki page right now for all these departments. If you were to ask most people, when did the Federal Department of Education start in U.S. history? I'm willing to bet you're going to get people saying, the 1800s, the early 1900s, 1979.
Year you were born.
1979, the year I was born for the purpose of destroying. No, but it again, this is the part where people, again, don't look at it as we're cutting funding from education. What we're doing is we're taking away a bureaucracy that is negatively influencing and impacting our education system and giving it back into the actual consumers of the education.
Yeah, if you look at the salaries, some of these bureaucrats are raking in money while the teachers are still, making hardly anything.
And Angel D, thank you for the super chat, says, can we really trust what people think we need to teach in schools anymore? Hard to be optimistic about that with family units being attacked and values being replaced by deeply entrenched wokeism. No, absolutely. And this is one of the problems when we have these federal agencies. What they do is they provide a mechanism for politicians to use the agency in order to push their political ideology or agenda on people, regardless of whether or not they want it. I go through this all the time. Right? All the time. I want parents to be able to make more of these decisions. And some people will say, but some parents will make bad decisions. Yes, but what's the alternative? The alternative is you're going to hand over massive amounts of power to state or federal agencies, in this case, a federal agency, federal department, in the hopes that they'll make better decisions. I'm sorry, what evidence do I have to suggest that that's true?
And their track record is already trash.
Well, and you already saw, like, the best own on this one was Thomas Massey, because when Betsy DeVos was made the head of the Department of Education, Democrats lost their minds. Like, this is horrible. And Thomas Massey said, I agree, this is horrible. We, join my bill to make sure that Betsy DeVos cannot have any say over your child's education. And he had all these liberals on Twitter and whatnot, like retweeting, like, yeah, Massey. It was a bill to get rid of the Department of Education. But Massey was proving the point. It's like, when you have a massive federal bureaucracy that has this degree of influence over your child's education, that is going to be controlled by whoever is at the head of the bureaucracy. So this assumption that, oh, no, it's only going to be the best science and the best technology. No, it'll be based off of the whims of the people in charge at the time.
Yeah.
So
the kids there are basically a bunch of guinea pigs. They're experimenting their education, philosophies on them. And when then they completely are disastrous, then they make a few adjustments and they experiment some more.
Yeah. All right. So we're Department of Transportation gone. Next one, housing and urban development. All right. Anybody
They're
want
not going to like my take on that.
Anybody want to take a, okay, I'm not going to like your take?
No,
I'm not going to like your take?
They.
Oh, they.
General public.
So this came around.
I'll bet you our audience likes
September 9th, 1965. It was part of the Great Society, and it was part of this federal program to once influence the way that, cities developed and whatnot. We could probably talk a little bit about Detroit on this one, but here's the mission. Housing and Urban Development, commonly known as HUD. HUD's mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. HUD is working to strengthen the housing market to bolster the economy and protect consumers, meet the need for quality, affordable rental homes, utilizing housing as a platform for improving quality of life, build inclusive and sustainable communities free from discrimination, and transform the way HUD does business. So part of their mission statement is to transform the way they do business. What does that even mean? But I look at everything else and I'm thinking, we need a federal bureaucracy for this. We need a federal bureaucracy to tell cities how to develop. How did that work out, by the way, with things like the interstate system in Detroit, where a bunch of federal dollars came in and essentially destroyed, elements of downtown Detroit because they decided, oh, well, we need more infrastructure projects in here. Like, I don't understand why anybody would look at the federal government and say, you know what? I don't think we know how to build our own city. We need a federal agency to come in here and incentivize and to tell us how to make strong, sustainable, inclusive communities with quality, affordable homes for all. The federal government is one of the biggest things pushing things like rent control, which is why you have areas in like New York City where you have more abandoned like rooms than you do homeless people. Because there's no longer any incentive to be able to upkeep a building because of government policies. So I'm sorry, I don't trust the government to actually provide for any of this. This just ends up being another way that a federal department gets to take your money and then give it to the people and to the contractors and the people with the best lobbyists under the cause of, oh, we're making inclusive communities and they're more sustainable and sorry.
This is just so that politicians can go to ribbon cuttings and like hold a little shovel in their hand and pretend they're doing something.
By the way, have you seen the building? Have you actually seen the building for housing and urban development in Washington, D.C.?
It looks like brutalist Stalinist architecture.
It does.
Actually, it doesn't look like brutalist Stalinist architecture. It looks like brutalist like Brezhnev era architecture, because at least under Stalin they had Soviet realism, which was like trying to look like classical style.
Yeah, all I can say is like the one thing I can say about a lot of the architecture in DC is that it's actually, especially the more classical stuff, it's actually rather beautiful until you get to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then it looks like a concrete Cracker Jack box. Like it's ugly, right?
Again, it looks like the Soviets designed it,
I
which
tend
makes
to think
total sense because it's central planning. I mean, when it comes to
architecture from the 60s and 70s and even 80s is awful.
Oh no, architecture post 1930s or 40s is all universally bad.
So ugly.
Architecture died after Art Deco. That was the last great era of designing buildings, and now ever since then they've tried to suck the soul and life out of buildings around you. It's all. I mean, it's almost like another form of nihilism, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. I would get rid of the entire department. I don't think that there's a single reason that the federal government should have any say whatsoever over housing policy in the United States.
Yeah.
And for anybody to say, oh, well, we need this because, think about all the poor people that, need assistance to find homes or need public housing. Public housing in the United States has been an abysmal failure. Go look at Cabrini Green if you want proof of that. There's no reason that the federal government should be spending a single cent on anything related to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. What a bang-up job they did with housing and urban development. Go to any urban center in this country right now and see, like, it's...
And look at the projects.
The
and think,
word
oh, thank God.
The word inner city is now a euphemism for decaying ghetto, for crying out loud. Like, who do you think is responsible for this? We did a Y Minute actually once on how the shortest highway in the United States destroyed Detroit. Mm-hmm. Well, part of the reason, actually, this gets to the Department of Transportation, which I think we'll get to it in the future. But like, it's federal bureaucrats that are responsible for so many of the things that have led to the destruction of inner cities in the United States. It wasn't that long ago. It was a half century ago or more that inner cities in the United States were actually the most beautiful parts of cities. And now they're completely destroyed. They're decaying husks. So no, there's no reason that we should have a Department of Housing and Urban Development whatsoever.
No.
They don't even do their job right.
I think we get rid of the whole thing. Next is Department of Commerce.
We're gonna have to try to like race through these.
I'm gonna
we
go
only
faster.
have like 25 more minutes, and
No, we're just going to have to go over.
Department of Commerce, 1903, budget of about $16.3 billion. The mission of the agency, the mission of the department is to create the conditions for economic growth and opportunity. Wasn't that part of the mission statement of the Department of Treasury as well?
I've got a better idea. How about that be the mission statement of individuals in the United States?
There we
Calvin
go.
Coolidge once said that the business of America is business.
Yeah.
Why do we need a federal department to repeat the phrase again?
Federal department, the mission of the department is to create the conditions for economic growth and opportunity.
Yeah, here you want to know what those conditions should be?
What?
Let's remove 90% of all the taxes and regulations in the United States. Boom, there's your conditions met.
Well, you look at what it is. All right, so what does commerce actually do? All right, so you got the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. You got the National Institute for Standards and Technology. You got departmental management. That's $467 million. Holy crap. All right, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Oh, okay. There's actually a really interesting discussion in kind of like libertarian circles on the whole idea of intellectual property and whatnot. But let's just say for right now, fine, you can keep the Patent and Trademark Office. Bureau of the Census. That's under Department of Commerce. I don't think it should be under Department of Commerce.
That should be like under Department of Interior, I feel like.
Economic Development Administration. Gone. Get rid of it. International Trade Administration. Bureau of Industry and Security, $103 million. Bureau of Economic, $97 million for the Bureau of Economic Analysis. What exactly are they analyzing that makes it so damn expensive? Minority Business Development and National Technical Information Service. I'm sorry, I'm looking at this going, why do you need a $50 million budget for that? Why do you need I'm sorry, I don't think we need a Department of Commerce.
I will also say this is not under Department of Commerce, but it's related to it. We need to get rid of the Export-Import Bank.
Yes.
That doesn't answer, if I recall, to any specific department.
No.
But that's a whole nother agency that just needs to go.
All right, let's go to the next one. Okay,
also, the Federal Reserve.
So anybody want to keep the Department of Commerce? Anybody see a reason why we need a Federal Department of Commerce? All right, gone. All right, Environmental Protection Agency.
Immediately gone.
Next question.
Wait. Okay, all right, I want to play devil's advocate here for just a second.
No.
Oh, no, I'm going to play it. Our mission is to protect human health and the environment. First of all,
they don't care about human health.
Okay, whatever.
Clearly, they do not care about human health.
So let me ask you a question. The federal government does have some jurisdiction with respect to interstate trade as well as federal law. So theoretically, if you had one state allowing an industry to pollute and dumping it all in the Mississippi and running it down, right? The question would be, what mechanism would you use? What mechanism would the federal government use to adjudicate that problem between the two states? Would you just use federal law enforcement? Like, I'm with you. I would get rid of the EPA, but I am saying that there are certain things that the EPA does.
Isn't the EPA responsible for some of these horrible
instances?
Yeah, go look up the Colorado River that turns yellow.
Real quick, you know the answer, I think. Which U.S. president gave us the Environmental Protection Agency? You can't answer.
FDR.
Okay, FDR, good guess.
I'm going to say Nixon.
Richard Nixon
Nice.
gave us the Environmental Protection Agency. That's right. For all you...
See, he is a criminal.
No, but so I would say this. This is the only part that I want to make sure that we make a distinction here, is that there are some areas where I can look at it and I can say, okay, these are certain problems that need to be need to be addressed. But this would just be like an environmental law section under the FBI or an environmental section underneath some sort of federal law enforcement agency. I don't think you need the Environmental Protection Agency. And like you said, the EPA has already been a source of problem for other things. So I'm getting rid of it, and I'm moving the legitimate portions of its functions under federal law enforcement. Anybody want to keep it?
No.
All right, EPA.
Get rid of it.
All right, Department of Labor.
Get rid of it.
Get rid of the entire Department of Labor.
Department of Labor started in 1913. What a shocker! Right during the Progressive era, right?
Yeah, this is another example of conservatives willingly funding their opposition.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but like, and this has become a bigger issue in recent years with the rise of populism on the right. But I'm sorry, labor unions overwhelmingly, it's like 95+% of their donations and endorsements go to Democrats. There's no reason and the Department of Labor is effectively a federal agency, a federal department whose effective mission statement is, they don't say this, but their mission statement is effectively to promote and side with labor unions. There's no reason for conservatives to be funding the opposition. Again, there's so many examples of this, of instances where the federal government is spending money to promote left-wing interests or organizations or interest groups that fund our ideological opponents.
It's
and
because they found
we
a
just
loop
go
cycle.
along with it.
They found a loop cycle. Basically, these you've got these labor unions that are basically extorting funds out of the federal government. They're fighting with taxpayers basically on that. No, I'm talking about public sector.
Yeah, you're talking about public sector unions.
Public sector. I have no problem with private sector, whatever. As long as there's no leg up given by the government. But what I find interesting is that you've got these politicians who receive money from the labor unions, and then they push the money back out to the labor unions, and then they receive money from, and it's just this loop cycle.
It's a funnel. We see the same thing with Planned Parenthood and other institutions like that. But when I look at the Department of Labor, here's the agency mission, right, from 1913, to foster, promote, well, this is their current agency mission, to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of the wage earners, job seekers, and retirees of the United States, improve working conditions, advance opportunities for profitable employment, and assure work-related benefits and rights. This is what I love, assure work-related benefits and rights. We already have a court system to adjudicate contract law. We don't need an entire federal department. What Christian said was accurate. What the Department of Labor was set up to do was essentially tip the scales in the favor of labor unions. Now, people will ask me, Nick, are you against labor unions? No, I'm not against labor unions. I'm against public sector labor unions because the whole idea of a labor union is we as workers decide that, okay, we're providing a benefit to the company in the form of our labor. The company is providing a benefit to us in the form of wages for our labor. And so the idea is that labor organizes in order to try to push for better wages and better conditions. And then the employer can choose whether or not they want to meet those conditions. And how does the employer or the business owner make that decision? They make the decision based off of whether or not they can replace their current labor force. Is it more advantageous for them to pay higher wages or to make better conditions based off of what the labor union is asking for, or can they more easily replace them with somebody else to do the job?
That's assuming, though, that these labor unions haven't lined the pockets of some politician in order to create a regulation that gives them the leg up on these.
Thank you. That's the whole point I was trying to get to.
Okay.
I wasn't leaving that part out. I was saying that if you look at it in a free market economy, laborers can say, hey, listen, we don't think we're being treated well here, and if we're not going to get treated better, we're going to leave. And now you're not going to be able to run your company. By the same token, if those laborers' labor was worth was worth as much as some people think it is, they wouldn't need the company in the first place. They would just do the labor at their own home or what. So obviously, it's about understanding that both sides are providing a benefit. The problem is exactly what you articulated. And that is what happens when one side of the equation, whether it's the business owner or the labor union, goes to the government for special treatment. And that's what happened. The Department of Labor is essentially set up to give special treatment to labor versus the employees or the employers. And that's problematic. Like, I don't want business owners going to the government, getting special regulations, engaging in cronyism to give themselves an advantage over labor, right? And I don't want the labor doing the same thing, but we have an entire department dedicated toward it. So I'm sorry.
Cut it.
I say cut it.
Cut it.
I don't think you need if you wanted to do this at the state level, I would see a clear constitutional authority for you to be able to do it based off of your state constitution. I don't see it at the federal level. All right, so that's gone. All right, we got a few more here, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
Well, then I think briefly at the conclusion, you should go through some of the independent agencies.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency.
Yeah. Well, don't worry.
Okay.
We'll get to it. My gosh. All right. Let me see. What do we got? Health and Human Services, founded in 1953. All right. Health and Human Services. Are we keeping this?
Oh my gosh.
No, I get rid of that one too.
This is, when I hear that, I'm going, wait a minute. Aren't these the people that put out all that propaganda in our cartoons during like the Bugs Bunny era? You know, talking about, I don't know. Anyway, there's all this propaganda in the form of cartoons. I don't know the last time you guys have
talking
watched.
about, what was it? DDT.
There's that one. And then there's also, oh gosh, there were a few others where,
Well, let's look at what their mission statement is. It is the mission of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to enhance and protect the health and well-being of all Americans. We fulfill that mission by providing for effective health and human services and fostering advances in medicine, public health, and social services. Again, the thing that always bothers me is when these departments act as if they're at the forefront of all of these industries and they're the ones leading the charge in innovation. I'm sorry, government agencies are almost never leading innovation. That's usually the private sector.
To give people an idea of what's under Department of Health and Human Services, there's a few sub-agencies that answer to the Department of Health and Human Services, like the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention.
yes, let's cut it all.
All three of those things need to go away, like immediately. When you look and see, I mean, over the past 3 years, it shouldn't be. Anybody with a brain should realize at this point, like, I'm sorry, NIH should be gone. CDC should be gone. Like these are federal agencies that have like actively worked to just make people's lives miserable.
Well,
over the
except
last
for the
3
people
years.
that they made very, very wealthy.
Yeah, and I don't care about making them more wealthy. Like, I care about the fact that eventually we're going to run into financial Armageddon if we don't do something.
Yeah.
But you know what?
Just look at how many billionaires were created over COVID.
Unfortunately, the problem is that this is ultimately still a question of if you're king for a day, because we all know that we're never going to be able to fix any of these problems in terms of eliminating so many of these. Like I'm old enough to remember when Mitt Romney, not exactly the most conservative stalwart there ever was, lost the 2012 presidential election because he said that he wanted to cut funding for Big Bird. Like we are I've said this before. We're dealing with pathologically unserious people here within the federal government. There is no appetite to cut a single cent of spending for anything within the federal budget. Anything. Well, we can't even cut federal funding for Big Bird.
Okay. We can black pill everyone later. All right, we're going to go through the nice part now, which is what if we could do this stuff? Okay, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid is like the vast portion of this program, and this is the part too, just like Social Security, right? Because Department of Social Security is another one on here. Whenever you talk about any sort of changes to these, they've become like sacred. Like you want people to die. You want people to starve. You want people to, not be able to have access to healthcare. Again, here's what I had a lady once come to my, she wanted to talk to me. She was very upset with me because I didn't want to expand Medicaid, which was basically an expansion of Obamacare in Virginia. And she was talking about how desperately this was needed. And I was like, okay. I said, I completely understand that people need access to quality and affordable health care. I don't think the government is especially good at ensuring quality, affordability, or access. Like maybe access is the one thing they do. But the thing is, if you have access to something that's not quality and not affordable, what does that even mean?
No, all it did is give you access to health insurance, but the health care is still very inaccessible.
Well, so I asked her, I said, what is your biggest problem? Like if we're really talking, if we're really going to be serious about Medicaid and Medicare, and we're really going to offer this up as like, this is the safety net. Here's what you need to understand. First of all, it's no longer a safety net. We've and this happens with every, quote unquote safety net we have, is that it always starts off with, we're going to set up a program for the destitute. And then the definition of what constitutes destitute and who actually applies for it always increases. And the reason why it always increases is because you got to have a cutoff somewhere. So if the cutoff is, if you're making poverty level wages. Okay, well now if I am making poverty level wages and I make $100 more a month, is that worth more to me than the benefits I get from the social program? No. Well, then now I'm disincentivized to increase my wealth unless I can get a big enough jump to where it actually makes sense. But the problem is that because that same federal government that's managing Medicare and Medicaid also has things like EMTALA laws, which require hospitals, and most people think this sounds nice until you think about it, requires hospitals to see you and provide you medical services regardless of your ability to pay. Now, again, you might think, what sort of cold-hearted human being would turn away somebody that walks into the ER with a gunshot wound or demand to see their insurance card first? I'm going to tell you right now, I think the vast majority of doctors and nurses would actually help stabilize that person first. That's not the problem. The problem, as my mother, who's been a nurse for over 40 years, will tell you, is the people that will come into the emergency room because they want a blanket, they want a sandwich, they want to watch TV, they want to be seen, and they will show up day after day after day, and they are required by law to treat this as if, no, this isn't a person that just wants a blanket and a free sandwich. This is a person that is, has serious medical issues that we have to stop what we're doing from the other people that we're seeing in order to make sure that they get seen as well. And my mom once said, if you would put in a $5 copay, you would stop so much of this. And a $5 copay would not prevent anybody from getting necessary medical care that they actually need, but it would prevent a lot of people that are abusing this system. And it is because of government intervention. If you are upset about quality, if you are upset about affordability, if you are upset about access, I can point you to all of the various government interventions into the healthcare system that have made it so, whether it be through licensing things, which gives special privileges to the American Medical Association with respect to setting up medical schools, whether it's licensing and registration requirements that prevent people who are capable of providing basic services from being able to do so, otherwise they'll get sued, right? Whether it's prescription drug laws. I mean, you name it. The reason why anybody is frustrated with the American healthcare system is not because of a lack of government interference. It's because of an excess of it. And so when I say things like the Department of Health and Human Services has, in my opinion, been a net detriment to the provision of healthcare services in this country, that's why. That's why. Federal bureaucracies are not known for their ability to innovate and adapt quickly to ever-changing procedures, technologies, and whatnot. No, what do? They come up with very specific guidelines, which are always risk-averse, by the way, right? And then it's all like, if you do these things, we will give you money. Well, now, are you encouraging the hospital to innovate? Are you encouraging the hospital to do all the other things? Are you encouraging medical professionals to innovate? No. You're encouraging them to do whatever the government says to do in order to get the guaranteed money from the government. And that's a huge part of the problem. So I look at these services and look, I can see National Institutes of Health. I'm sorry, I think they proved to be horrible during COVID. Food and Drug Administration. This also goes back to the USDA too on some of the stuff where it's always like, oh no, these agencies are going to ensure your protection. Okay, well, I think that's a dubious claim when I look at some of the things that have happened. When I look at things like the food pyramid, and what I find out is that, oh, you didn't tell me what was most healthy for me based off of the best available science. You told me what was healthy for me based off of what the industries that have the best lobbyists wanted you to say, right? So when are you held accountable for that? I'm tired of people telling me, oh, without this agency, there'd be no healthcare. Without this agency, there'd be no safety protocols. Without this agency... When they fail, who holds them accountable? Where do I see the accountability within the marketplace? Well, there isn't one because you're not the FDA's customer. You're not. Politicians are. All right.
Got a super chat from Rob I'd like to read real quick.
Yeah.
What good is the DOT when NAFTA exempts foreign drivers while we have destroyed the lower class's greatest path to business ownership with DOT regulations like electronic driver logs? Happy birthday. Hope you got a mug.
Thank you, Rob. No, I think it's interesting. Department of Transportation, the one thing that you could potentially use to justify the Department of Transportation would have to do with interstate highways.
And railroads, potentially.
Yeah, interstate highways, railroads, and I don't think you could even really claim ports. Waterways, navigable waterways. You could say that there's some role right there, but as you said, this ends up being a problem when you set up a free trade agreement, which again, I am a free trade supporter. I know that makes some people mad, but I want Americans to be able to trade with whoever they want, provided that we're not trading with a government that's, openly hostile or to the United States or using slave labor and stuff. Like, I generally speaking, I don't want to interfere in your ability to buy the products that you want to buy them from. But to your point, we set up these contradictory rules where now it's like, how are you going to have less regulations when you're coming from a foreign country than if you're a domestic driver?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I think that
it's a great point.
The compromise, I say this like, the compromise that I would say is that like, you could keep some of the responsibilities of the Department of Transportation without having it as a department. For example, some of the stuff that you talked about with like waterways or railroads or highways, you could just put that under the Department of Commerce.
Well, we got rid of the Department of Commerce.
Well, then, what you probably end up doing then is you merge the two together and you keep whatever stuff within those two that's actually relevant.
Yeah.
And then you simply rename that, Department of Commerce, or you keep that as the Department of Transportation. But the point is that, I mean, the Department of Transportation's budget is $145 billion. And you know what a huge chunk of that is stuff that quite frankly should be privatized anyway.
Yeah.
Like there's so now granted, Department of Transportation does not, if I recall, oversee Amtrak, which is an independent federal agency that quite frankly I think the federal government should divest itself from. It needs to be privatized, and if it can't survive, then guess what? It can't survive.
Yeah.
There's no reason for taxpayers to be subsidizing Amtrak at all, especially if you're living in Kansas, right? Amtrak
it's not
serves,
cheap either.
And I've ridden Amtrak, and you know who Amtrak serves the most? Politicians and liberal voters.
Yeah.
Once again, Democrats get into office, the left gets into office, and you know what they do? They use the federal government to fund and reward the people who elect them. Republicans and conservatives get into office, and what they do is they try to convince the left that they're not actually really the evil, mean, fascist bigots that the left claims that they are.
Yeah.
If the right spend as much attention to their own base as they do trying to court the viewership of MSNBC, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have right now at the federal level.
We got two more to go through, and I think we're going to Veterans Affairs we can definitely talk about, but we're going to go these quick because I want to go through the list here and kind of do a wrap up. Where was it? Department of the Interior.
I actually would keep the Department of Interior too.
Okay.
And here's the reason why. It was actually founded in the 1840s.
Yeah.
It's an older department, pre-Civil War, and there's a few things that you could argue the Department of Interior should be overseeing, like, for example, conducting the census. We talked about this earlier, that should fall under the Department of Interior. I think, isn't census actually Homeland Security?
It is now. No. It's Commerce.
It was Commerce.
Is it Commerce?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was Commerce.
Anyway, point is that I actually think that should fall under the Department of the Interior. Here's another reason why we should keep the Interior. Now, granted, I want to still cut huge amounts of it.
I get it. You don't want 70,000 employees like it currently has.
No. And part of the reason that they have that is because of all the federal lands that are owned. Now, here's the thing. Even though I think we should be selling off like 90% of federal lands, for example,
Agreed.
It's like over 90% of Nevada is owned by the federal government. I think it should go to the people of Nevada. And more importantly, it shouldn't even just go to the state. It should go to the people of Nevada. The federal government should be selling those lands to whoever wants to buy them.
Where else are they going to
them.
store the aliens?
Yeah.
Christian?
But the fact is that there will always be federal lands in general. Even if I had my way, right, and we sold off as much as we possibly could and we divested as much federal lands as we could, there will still be some federal land somewhere that is maintained for whatever reason. I don't think it should be 90% of some states, right? But there'll be something. And so obviously there should be an agency that manages those federal lands. So I do think there's a legitimate role that you could argue even under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that would justify a Department of the Interior, again, for maybe conducting things like running those federal lands or overseeing the census. So that's actually one of the few departments that I think we should keep, but I still think that there's no reason that there should be over 70,000 employees of it. Though.
No, and I could see that. And I would still keep the Department of State. I would still keep the Department of Justice, although there's a lot of sub portions of the Department of Justice.
I would eliminate the FBI entirely. The FBI has become completely weaponized against its own people.
So here's the question though. Like there is a constitutional justification for federal law enforcement.
Sure, so start a new agency.
I mean, okay, I don't know. I
We're
wouldn't.
supposed to be cutting agencies, Christian, not
There's
adding
a
new
lot.
ones.
No, there's a lot of things that I look at with like federal law enforcement that I don't understand why. Like I don't think we need an ATF.
That's another one that we should.
I don't think we need an ATF. I understand a Federal Bureau of Investigation because originally the FBI didn't even carry firearms. Like their job was to investigate.
Oh, I get their mission statement.
Well, wait a second. Their job was to investigate federal crime and then actually work with state and local law enforcement. And they needed state and local law enforcement because the state and locals were armed and the FBI wasn't.
That's not what the FBI does anymore, though.
I know that. What I'm saying is that I can look at an agency and decide whether or not you need to reform it or whether or not you just need to get rid of it. And the first question I ask is, what's the constitutional justification for this? I look at a lot of the ones that we talked about, Department of Ed, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce. I don't see an Article 1, Section 8 justification. These agencies exist because we have a 16th Amendment and the federal government has a budget and they want to tell states what to do. And this is a way that they use the agency to basically extort money in order to get states to do what they want. Like, do what we want and here's some money. Don't do what we want and you don't get the money, right? So that's the thing. Like I see, again, we need a Department of Justice. I would significantly reduce the amount of law enforcement within the DOJ. Especially on things like the ATF. Like
I do not understand the ATF. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Yeah.
Why did somebody think this was a necessary thing?
I don't know.
Tobacco, not illegal.
Well, it's about managing various laws with respect to who can, trafficking and things like that. So what a lot of people don't understand is that because certain local and state laws, which should be the responsibility of the local and state, they will raise taxes so much that there's actually a tobacco trafficking, market in New York City. The other thing is I don't have the specific things for the ATF right here, like as far as their budget and whatnot, but let me see where we can find it here. Yeah, I'm sure if we went into it, we would find what their original justification was for.
ATF sounds like some kind of agency that was propped up in order to like catch Al Capone or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know its origin out.
There's no reason the federal government should not be regulating tobacco or alcohol at all. I mean, there's a reason we have the 21st Amendment, right? And they definitely should not be regulating firearms at all.
I think we've hit all the departments, right? These are the big departments. A lot of you have independent agencies, you have the departments, then you have all the sub stuff under those departments. When it gets to
independent agencies,
we're not going to get to all of them because there's just too many. But I want to give everybody like an idea of some of these ones, like the National Science Foundation. Nope. Federal Communications Commission. Probably not. Railroad Retirement Board. NASA. Small Business Administration. I would get rid of.
You'd get rid of NASA.
Why?
I don't think I'd totally get rid of NASA, but honestly, I don't understand. Things like that, it's not the one. Like Agency for International Development, USAID, I would get rid of that in a heartbeat. That USAID, if you really dig into that, I've got a buddy that was writing about this, and we were talking about federal agencies. And he's not exactly like a hardcore conservative. He just doesn't like fraud, waste, and abuse. And he's like, the one you need to get rid of is USAID, because USAID, which has I think it's around $49 billion. He goes, there's nothing more lucrative than working for USAID and then getting out and starting your own nonprofit, group that's going to then get a contract from USAID in order to encourage Ethiopians to wear shoes, right? It's the sort of stuff like that where there's so much cronyism between the aid community and government agencies like distributing USAID that he goes, it's a get-rich-quick scheme for certain people.
We should not be spending a cent on foreign aid to any country in the entire world right now when we're running a budget deficit of $1.5 trillion annually. I would argue that we shouldn't be spending a cent on foreign aid even if we were running a budget surplus, but there's literally no justification for us to be sending money we do not have to other foreign countries.
Yeah. Small Business Administration too. They're like, oh my gosh, you don't want to help small businesses? No, I don't want small businesses constantly going to a federal agency, which then picks and chooses the winners based off of your race, based off of your ethnicity, based off of your sex. And here's the question I have.
ESA score.
Here's the question I have for Small Business Administration and people like, well, they give loans. Those loans could still exist. They don't need a federal agency to go get them. They could still exist. The problem is that you see this within federal contracting. Well, they will require so many small business set-asides in order to award you a contract. And what you do is you have people that essentially set up fake consulting businesses, and then they make the CEO, a minority female. And now I have a business, and what happens is that, okay, now I put this person on this contract. They get a certain amount of the business on the contract because I'm obligated that maybe 30% or 20% of the overall dollars go to small businesses. And that's what they do. Another thing that you also, here's an honest question I have for the federal government right now. If I want to get a set aside for a minority-owned small business or for a women-owned small business, so I've been on several federal contracts, right, where we were writing proposals and you had to have a woman-owned small business represented as part of the obligation. Can I now identify as a woman and get the small business set aside? Can I now identify as a woman? Like every male-owned small business out there, you should immediately, if you're going after federal contracts or state contracts that have specific set-asides for women-owned small businesses, you should immediately say, I identify as a woman, and dare them to tell you you're not.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously.
Absolutely.
That's
how you break the system really fast.
That's how you break it. You want to break the system, have a bunch of dudes that own small businesses immediately go up and say, I want that women-owned small business set aside because I identify as a woman. And then dare the state and federal bureaucrats to say, no, you're not. And for everybody too on the women's side that's been encouraging this, okay, that's the consequence. I asked this question of a colleague in the General Assembly.
It's not fair anyway to have any kind of set aside for women. That's not equality. That's preferential treatment.
So let's look at some of these other ones. U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, no. Millennium Challenge Corporation, the heck is that? No. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, no. Corporation for National and Community Service, no. Securities and Exchange Commission. Oh, give me a break. All right. And thank you, Andrea, for the super chat. She goes, happy birthday, Nick. New to your channel. I'm with your friend. Anarcho-capitalism, the way forward. Defund them all in the Fed. Oh, by the way, can we just say right now, yes, we all agree with ending the Federal Reserve.
Yes. Hey, my license plate on my car says in Fed.
It's true. U.S. Agency for Global Media. Yeah, gone. Oh, gosh, what's another one? National Archives and Records Administration. I keep the National Archives. They keep the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence behind glass. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. No. Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Council. No. Export-Import Bank of the United States. Hell no. Hell no.
No, don't just eliminate that. Write it into law that no such thing will ever be created.
Oh my gosh. That's where you get rid of it and then you criminally charge people.
Salt the earth.
Okay, here's an interesting one. Here's the interesting one. The Peace Corps. I say no.
I say no.
I don't think we need a federally run Peace Corps. I think the private sector can do plenty of that. Let me see. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Absolutely no.
Nope, get rid of it. Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. The heck?
Cut.
Oh my gosh.
It's funny how some of these
here's another one. National Endowment for the Humanities.
Cut.
Gone.
Absolutely gone.
Same thing for National Endowment for the Arts. Gone.
Yeah, goodbye.
This is just like the Kennedy Center. Like, why does the federal government need to be the one running that?
Oh, remember when the Kennedy Center laid off their staff during COVID and then took COVID funds in order to they took, the equivalent of like PPP loans or something like that. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, why does the federal government need to be funding that type of stuff?
You want to know what the budget is for the Kennedy Center? And by the way, this is another thing I can't stand. They're like, oh, well, we need to promote the arts and make them affordable to everybody. Have you gotten tickets at the Kennedy Center?
Yeah, it's not affordable.
They ain't cheap. Guess what their budget is? $105 million. I thought it was billion there for a second. $105 million is the budget. So $105 million is
for
being
one
confiscated.
Freaking building.
Is being confiscated and sent to these people. All right.
So that you can spend $200 a ticket to go see Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh.
You won't find me there.
When we got that was a special thing when our daughter graduated. She loves theater. She wanted to see Hamilton. She loves the soundtrack. So I was adamant, like we were gonna get her and her fiance good tickets to go see Hamilton.
Oh my God.
Holy crap. I don't know where that $105 million that they're confiscating through taxes is going to in the Kennedy Center, but I know it wasn't to price reductions for tickets to Hamilton. I've never spent
like
that much.
$400 a ticket on that one? I think it was like $400 a ticket.
I don't know if it was that much. I think.
And Daddy was Santa and was like, "Here you go, sweetie."
No. This was a big milestone. She had graduated. She really wanted it. They wanted good seats. It wasn't that much either. It wasn't that much.
Almost.
It was not that much. All right. So anyways, you got all these, gosh dang. Federal Labor Relations Authority, gone. Harry S. Truman Scholarship
That's a
Foundation.
big one.
Office of Government Ethics. Theoretically, I would keep that, but I'd say they're not doing a bang-up job, right? So look, this is where we're at. So here's what I want us to do in kind of wrapping this up. So here's what we kept.
The guy who presses the nuke button.
Yeah, here's what we kept. Would we have the State Department? State Department is a legitimate function of government.
Although there's a lot within the State Department that needs to be cut.
There is, but they've got 30,000 employees, $58.1 billion budget. There's definitely stuff I'm cut from state. And not only that, I would totally reevaluate the way that the State Department actually trains their foreign service officers and everything else, because holy crap. Treasury is currently 100,000 employees and $16.4 billion budget. I would but again, we talked about what they actually have and what they can allocate. I don't see why the Treasury needs 100,000 employees. Someone's going to have to explain that to me. It's probably some of the law enforcement wings, the National Mint, stuff like that. Department of Defense, $852 billion, 3.2 million employees. I would cut from the Department of Defense, and I would certainly require that there be far more efficiency, but I would keep it. Department of Justice, we keep the Department of Justice. However, significant cuts to certain law enforcement agencies that we just don't think should exist. Department of Interior currently has 70,000 employees and $35 billion. I think the first thing I would do with the Department of Interior is sell off massive amounts of federal land that we have no business, managing. And I would significantly cut the number of employees. Department of Agriculture, $242 billion, 100,000 employees, gone. I'd cut it. Doesn't exist anymore. We do not need a federal Department of Agriculture. Sorry. Commerce, 41,000 employees, $16.3 billion, gone. Department of Labor, 15,000 employees, $97.5 billion, gone. Now again, there's certain sub agencies with some of these things that would be kept. So don't think that the whole $97.5 billion is gone. We don't need a Department of Labor. Health and Human Services, 65,000 employees, $1.7 trillion. That's mainly because of Medicaid and Medicare, but we don't need a federal Department of Health and Human Services. Housing and Urban Development, 9,000 employees, $61.7 billion, gone. Department of Transportation, 55,000 employees, $145 billion. We wouldn't completely cut that. We keep elements of the Department of Transportation, but we definitely cut it overall. Energy, Department of Energy, 10,000 employees, $45.8 billion, gone. Department of Education, 4,200 employees, $79.6 billion, gone. Veterans Affairs, I would keep, but here's what I would change about it. Right now they have 235,000 employees plus $308 billion. I don't think the VA needs to be in the business of running hospitals.
Vouchers.
To the extent, I think what we actually need is, I don't think we need a bunch of VA hospitals. I think what we actually need is veterans that are able to take a benefit that they earned, right? They didn't just get it because they, were there. They got it because they earned it, and they can take that benefit to local hospitals and things like that. If you wanted to make some sort of special argument for Veteran Affairs, I could see certain things dealing specifically with combat-related issues. But for the most part, I think it would be better if you just gave the benefit directly to the veteran and let them take it wherever they went. Because right now you have this situation where you got to drive 50 miles to the nearest VA hospital. And once it goes over 50, there's some veterans choice things that you can utilize, but I just don't think it's great. And then Homeland Security, 250,000 employees, $101.6 billion. Again, what we would do there is probably get rid of the overall overarching Homeland Security. We'd still keep like Customs and Border Patrol and a lot of those agencies. Just not sure that if having a Homeland Security has actually been beneficial to interagency cooperation. So there you have it. The federal government is significantly reduced in overall size. A lot of departments gone, a lot of independent agencies gone as well. We couldn't even get to all the independent agencies. If I were to sit here and literally just scroll down as fast as I could reading them off, you would just be shocked at how many there are. You would just be shocked. And this is the part that really, I think, irritates a lot of us when we look at this. We will look at one of these agencies and we don't come to the conclusion that the reason why they exist is not important. We don't come to the conclusion that there might be a particular problem or challenge that needs to be addressed. What we question is, first, why is it the federal government's responsibility to address it? Second, okay, if this agency has existed, what has it done? How much has it spent? And I'm tired of people looking at it exclusively from the standpoint of, oh, well, but if they hadn't spent the money on this thing wouldn't exist. Okay, but if they hadn't taken the money from people in the first place, what are the other things that would have existed? What are the other priorities that would have been addressed if individuals that had the ability to spend their money on the things that they prioritized as opposed to what politicians prioritized? A politician sending money to somebody that called art the idea of putting a crucifix in a pot of urine. This happened. Right. I'm sorry, but I don't know many people right now, even people I don't know many people that are working incredibly hard to make ends meet that would have said, yeah, that was a good prioritization of my tax dollars. And yet that is inevitably what happens when we give more and more power, authority, and control to federal agencies. So please understand, this is a very important distinction. I think the arts are wonderful. I think the humanities are wonderful. I think a lot of the other issues that we're talking about today are wonderful. And there is certainly a need for action within these particular areas to address challenges, to promote things, great. But I don't think it should come at the coercive power of government, especially at the federal level. Because that's where we get these long lists where somebody can sit down and find $485 billion in stuff that 90% of the population would look at and say, that's ridiculous. And yet, that represents a amount of waste that is larger than the state budgets of any state in the country. That's how much waste we're looking at year after year. This isn't just a one-time thing. It's not like we found $485 billion worth of waste and that was it. No, it's year after year after year because of federal mismanagement. And this is the part where it becomes time for people to start thinking of it in terms of, it's not that I want everything to go away. It's that we have tried to use these federal agencies to achieve these end states, and they have failed. And if you're going to reward failure by simply giving them bigger budgets and more people and more authority and more rules and regulations to be able to enforce, what gives us any assurance that things are actually going to get better? Why isn't it time for those of us who look at these problems and say, I have a feeling that either the states or localities or individuals just simply making their own priorities or working together in voluntary cooperation, either in the marketplace or in charitable institutions or in other civic organizations, I think they would do a better job. Why do I think they would do a better job? Because they're more accountable. Because those people that can't just take your money arbitrarily in the private sector, they are more accountable to the outcomes for what they spend the money on. States are more accountable to their constituents than I would argue the federal government is. Localities are more accountable to their constituents than I would argue the states are. So let's start looking at some of these problems. And when you say, well, they're just too big, most big problems are solved by millions of people working at a local level, either again through charity or through the marketplace. Because the way the problem affects them on that individual level is usually unique. Or there is at the very least unique aspects that can't be addressed by some massive federal bureaucracy handing out dollars to the people with the best lobbyists. We keep saying that the real problem here is, it's all these lobbyists. Ladies and gentlemen, the lobbyists wouldn't be there if the federal government didn't have the power over life and death of your businesses, of your hospitals, of your school systems. They're there for the same reason that robbers robbed the bank. It's because that's where the money is. If you're going to give all the money to politicians and bureaucrats, well then of course, industries, education, hospitals, doctors, everyone is going to go to that place to try to get it. And they're going to try to figure out the best way to do it. And what you're doing is you're not putting power in the hands of consumers. You're not putting power in the hands of the people that provide the products and services that we all want. You are putting the power in the hands of politicians. And it will inevitably produce these kind of perverse results. I don't care how nice and ethical and friendly the politicians are. If you give them this much power, it's going to get abused. And they will believe they are doing it for the absolute best purposes imaginable. They will believe that they're absolutely committed to getting the best outcomes for everybody. You look at all these mission statements, they sound wonderful. How could you be against that mission statement? I'm not against the mission statement. I'm against believing that you're capable of achieving it. And I am tired of you taking more and more and more from the American people and never once coming back to those same people and saying, at the very least, hey, thank you. Thank you for producing all of the money that we confiscated from you in order to produce these end states. No, you fail to produce the end states and you go back to the very people that actually produce the wealth that you took from them, and you treat them like garbage. You treat them like they're greedy because they just want to keep more of what they've earned. Because guess what? If they could keep more of what they earned, they wouldn't need your stupid department. They wouldn't need your agency. They wouldn't need your handout. But then that would leave you without a job, and it would leave you without power. And gosh, we can't have that. And you wonder why Anthony Oliver's song, Richmond, North of Richmond, has been so powerful. I said it like day 2 when that song came out. I said, watch, they're gonna try to destroy him. Not just because of what a song said. They're going to try to destroy him because of the way people from all walks of life, of different political perspectives, of different ethnicities, the way that they're all listening to it, hearing it, and resonating with it. People are tired of feeling like our future is no longer within our hands, and they're no longer buying that we're one election away from solving it. And part of the reason why they don't is because we just read off today what these organizations consume, what they take, what they're supposed to do with it, and what's actually happening. And so the real solution is you reduce this, you cut this, you take this away, and you put the power back into the hands of the people that are actually out there working, trying to take care of themselves so they don't need someone else, least of all a government agency, to take care of them or their families. And that's how you actually get back to the sort of country that we all believed we were living in. So I want to thank you to everybody for all of the birthday wishes. I want to thank you to everybody for the input, the questions that were asked. They were great. I think we did a pretty good job of cleaning house with the federal government today. There's more work to be done. I'm sure some of you think we could have cut more. Some of you think that maybe we shaved a little bit too much off on some departments, but I stand by the decisions that we've made today because, again, it's not their money and it's not their power. It's yours. And the more control you have over your life, the more convinced I am that you're going to make better decisions. And millions of people getting to do that is what it constitutes to be a free country, not just simply voting every 2, 4, or 6 years. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Good Ranchers for sponsoring this podcast and the work that we do. It really makes it possible for us to be able to dedicate more time to this. I'm not sure if people understand this. We all have other jobs. We all have other jobs that pay the rent and pay the mortgage. And so when we do have an advertiser like Good Ranchers that comes alongside us and offers a product and offers a deal to our listeners, again, promo code Nick for $25 off, free shipping. And if you sign up for one of the subscriptions, not only can you get locked into a good price, but you can also get 2 pounds of fresh ground beef. It's a fresh ground beef. It's a product that you're really going to like. It's good value, and it's by a company that is out there, again, not trying to just play on your patriotic sympathies. They're actually trying to prove that by doing the right thing, you actually produce a really good business and a really good product. So thank you very much to Good Ranchers. Thank you for all of you for listening. Please consider joining our chat, joining our community, because, again, I want to thank Neil. Neil was one of the inspirations in our community chat for this episode. You know, what would we actually cut? What would we actually do? We had some other people, too, that also contributed insight to that. So we hope we have answered your question, and we hope you're having a good week, and we will see you on Thursday.